Celsius as we start off Thursday. Those areas of cloud across Scotland bringing some outbreaks of drizzly rain, especially for the northwest of Scotland, and that becoming more persistent later in the morning as a weather front moves in. That also affecting western parts of Northern Ireland by the end of the afternoon. But elsewhere across the UK, another fine day to come. Again, the odd shower possible for central and southern parts of England, but plenty of sunny spells breaking out across the southern half of the UK, and temperatures reaching 17 to 21 Celsius. Now, Thursday evening brings further outbreaks of light rain and drizzle for Scotland and Northern Ireland, that trickling into the far north of England by the end of the night. But it weakens as it runs into high pressure, and that high pressure tending to stick around for the weekend, so a lot of fine weather to come. Bye-bye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome to GB News with me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up today, because it's Wednesday, it's Prime Minister's Questions, live from the House of Commons. Well, we say Prime Minister's Questions, however, no Sunak versus Starmer clash in the House today. The Prime Minister flying to Japan for a summit with world leaders, while Sir Keir Starmer is out and about promoting his house-building plans on Greenbelt land, no less. So instead, it's Angela Rayner putting questions to the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. And I was going to say it might be all the more exciting for that. Who will know? Well, let's actually set up our panel of MPs with us today. Conservative MP for Bolton West, Chris Green, and Labour MP for Blackley and Broughton, Graham Stringer. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. We should just add, we also understand there is going to be an urgent question after PMQs. This is from Justin Madders, Labour MP for Ellesmere, Porton and Neston, on the future of the British car industry. Because we have this announcement by Vauxhall up at Ellesmere Port, or at least its parent company, the whole question as to whether they'll continue to make cars here because of a row over battery production.
Well, I will be interested in what the answer to the question is, but there is no doubt that the government have been slow to incentivise and invest in car batteries. The car battery manufacturing plant in the north...
British Volt, as it was going to be,
Yeah, went pear-shaped.
Yeah.
Money spent to no purpose whatsoever.
And who wants a pear-shaped battery? Indeed,
yeah. So I think there are a lot of questions to answer, as well as our relationship with the EU.
Well, I mean, you are both Eurosceptics. I think that's probably fair to say. However, I mean, I'm just wondering what you make of what the announcement from this parent company is on the whole sort of political front. An indication from Stellantis that insufficient battery production in the UK or Europe, but the Brexit deal is a threat to our export business and the sustainability of our UK manufacturing operations, i.e. Ellesmere Port.
It's a huge concern for the workers at Ellesmere Port and for the organisation more broadly. The government needs to be clear on both sides of the equation. They want to go all electric and get rid of the diesel and petrol vehicles. They've said...
2030, I think.
2030, 35.
Yeah.
They said they want to close that element down, but they haven't yet got a clear plan of how they're going to get the battery manufacturing and the other manufacturing in the UK. Other countries, arguably, at the moment, are better placed for that. So we want the ministers to be clear how we're going to deliver on this plan. But the European Union, or countries within the European Union now, are eroding their ambitions for electrification of the system. But there are problems for the companies in Europe, so it's not just a Britain's got problem. European Union countries have problems too.
I mean, we should add, I think there are 35 plants in planning or earmarked across Europe for battery production. But you're right, I mean, Germany leading the way, saying, actually, let's not get rid of the internal combustion engine quite yet.
No, those ambitions about protecting the environment and going all electric have been rather ambitious, but that's my point, is that the ambitions in terms of delivering on the technology and making batteries reliable and affordable and having them perform at the level we would expect hasn't yet been delivered. So if we want the manufacturing in Europe, whether it's the European Union countries or the United Kingdom, I think there's a huge amount for politicians to deliver upon.
Yeah, what about the Shadow Business Secretary then, Jonathan Reynolds? We've been let down by a government in chaos. The government should have seen these issues coming and been proactive. And Sir Keir Starmer then saying the Brexit deal needs to improve. I mean, he's not saying go back into EU, but saying the whole Brexit thing really was pretty ham-fisted.
Well, I think right from the very beginning, my guess is Chris and I would agree on this, is the government were too slow to tell the European Union what our objectives were. I believe there was probably a Canada-style free trade deal on offer at the beginning. There's quite a lot of evidence to show that, which would have avoided some of these problems. But on the specific issues of batteries, you mentioned the environment. I think we're going too quickly towards net zero. All these batteries, when they're produced, themselves will create pollution.
Heavy metals. Lithium ion.
Lead, lots of pollution. Nobody has thought through, has worked out the environmental impact of that. The electric car market is declining because it's very expensive without public subsidy.
And apparently we can't park them in our car parks because they're too heavy for all the multi-stories.
The national grid can't supply electricity to them. Quite frankly, the government has been caught virtue signalling without having the ability to get there practically.
OK, I think we can cross the Commons now for Oliver Dowd in that dispatch box.
The Prime Minister. He is currently travelling to Japan to attend the G7 summit. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that colleagues from across the House will join me in congratulating Liverpool for its wonderful staging of the Eurovision Song Contest on behalf of Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
The Royal Lancaster Infirmary is a 130-year-old crumbling hospital and was meant to be one of the government's 40 new hospitals. However, the funding announcement has been delayed 4 times already, so can the Deputy Prime Minister reassure my constituents that this is not going to be another broken Tory promise?
I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady that we remain fully committed to those 40 hospitals from our manifesto, and indeed we have already provided £3.9 billion worth of initial capital.
Craig McKinley. Mr. Speaker, I have a very serious matter affecting every constituency to bring to my right honourable friend's attention. Amazon have been facilitating the sale of counterfeit postage stamps from China, virtually perfect except for the barcode. I've contacted the NCA, the National Trading Standards, and I'm afraid I've received woeful responses. I've now sent my concerns to the Serious Fraud Office and the Economic Crime Unit of the City of London Police. Amazon are patently facilitating remittances of illegal gotten cash, and I believe this is in contravention of the Forgery and Counterfeiting Act 1981. Can my right honourable friend assist me in taking this further?
Well, Mr. Speaker, may I pay tribute to my honourable friend? I know how hard he has been campaigning on this important issue. The Home Secretary will have heard his remarks. I would say that the Digital Markets and Competition and Consumer Bill does put duties on those platforms, and ultimately, if fraud is being perpetrated, the police should take action.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to welcome yet another Deputy Prime Minister to the dispatch box, the third deputy that I've faced in 3 years. And you know what they say, the third time's a charm. And I'm also pleased to note, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister has a working class friend, finally. I seem to remember that after the loss of 300 Conservative seats at last year's local elections, the Right Honourable gentleman resigned, saying someone must take responsibility. After 1,000 more Conservative councillors had been given the boot by voters, who does he think is responsible now?
Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of the Right Honourable Lady's opening remarks, can I just say it really is a pleasure to see the Right Honourable Lady here today. I was, though, expecting to face the Labour leader's choice for the next Deputy Prime Minister if they win the election, so I'm surprised that the Lib Dem leader isn't taking questions today. Mr. Speaker, you will forgive me if I take the Right Honourable Lady's predictions with a pinch of salt. After all, she confidently predicted that the Right Honourable Member for Islington North would one day be Prime Minister. Remember, this is a man who wanted to abolish the army, scrap Trident, withdraw from NATO and abandon Ukraine. And what did she say to that? She couldn't wait for him to be Prime Minister.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely amazing that while the Labour Party is preparing to govern with a Labour majority, his party is starting to prepare for opposition, Mr. Speaker. And this week, at the National Conservative Conference, a member for Devisers blamed the country's problems on a new religion. He even hit out at the dystopian fantasy of John Lennon. The member for Pentonstone and Stockbridge said identifying falling birthing rates is the overarching threat to the UK. She criticised woke teaching for destroying children's souls and causing self-harm and suicide among people. And the Right Honourable Member for North East Somerset really let the cat out the bag when he said parties that try to gerrymander end up finding their clever schemes come back to bite them, as dare I said we found when insisting on voter ID. The Right Honourable gentleman opposite, while working in Number 10, said he had to listen to the radio every morning to find out what was really going on in the country. Apparently, he was surprised on a daily basis by what he learned. And most of his time was spent on day-to-day crisis management. 11 years on, Mr. Speaker, nothing has changed.
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm not quite sure what the question was then, Mr. Speaker. But if she wants to talk about this sort of thing, we all know what's going on with her and her leader. It's all lovey-dovey on the surface. They turn it on for the cameras, but as soon as they're off, it's a different story. They're at each other's throats. Mr. Speaker, they're the Phil and Holly of British politics.
Deputy Leader.
Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality is, after 13 years of Tory rule, they're still lurching from crisis to crisis and wallowing in their own mess. They can't solve the crisis because they are the crisis. The honourable member opposite should take more note of what's happening at his conferences in his party before trying to make up what's happening in mine. The Prime Minister pledged that by March, NHS waiting lists would fall. It's now May. So can he tell us, since he made that pledge, is the number of people waiting on late waiting lists higher or lower?
Mr. Speaker, we are making good progress, for example, with two-year waiting lists. But the Right Honourable Lady seems to forget a crucial fact. The United Kingdom experienced an unprecedented pandemic. Right before COVID, GP satisfaction was high. Delayed discharges were half. Ambulance targets were being met. And she knows that right now, in Labour-run Wales, exactly the same challenges are being faced. The difference between us is, on this side of the House, we've got a plan to fix it, while she's too busy playing petty politics.
Mr. Speaker, even before the pandemic, waiting lists were going up. So it doesn't wash that this government, after 13 years in power, is blaming everybody but themselves for what people are having to put up with. He appears to be claiming that 11,000 patients waiting more than 18 months is an achievement. The last Labour government reduced waiting times from 18 months to 18 weeks. And he can come back to me when he's achieved that. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, waiting lists are longer than when the Prime Minister made his pledge 5 months ago. The number of people in England waiting to start hospital treatment is the highest since records began. 7.3 million patients left waiting. Now, I know the Prime Minister has his own private GP, so maybe he doesn't appreciate the urgency. But he's left people like my constituent Carol waiting for over a year for an urgent appointment, moved from waiting list to waiting list with appointments cancelled again and again. So if not now, when will waiting lists fall?
It'll continue till I hear the end of this question. If I get any more interruptions, it will take longer. Angela Ray.
Mr. Speaker, they don't want to hear the question because they know the answer. They know the answer is that they failed the British people. So when will waiting lists fall?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I would gently say to the Right Honourable Lady, if she cares that much about access to our healthcare, why is she opposing our minimum service levels? They will provide core emergency services with vital cover during healthcare strikes. Does she not think that vulnerable patients deserve that level of care, or is she too weak to stand up to her union paymasters?
Mr. Speaker, we all want minimum service levels. It's this government that have failed to provide minimum service levels in all of our trains, in all of our public services, because they've run them down and mismanaged them for the last 13 years. Now, it's not just waiting times, Mr Speaker. 13 years after the Landmark Marmot review into child poverty, Sir Michael says this government is on track to make child poverty worse, with more than a quarter of our children living in poverty last year. When I was a young mum, I remember the sick feeling in my stomach not knowing if my wages would cover the bills. Yet his government has taken a wrecking ball to measures by the last Labour government to eradicate child poverty, even abolishing the Child Poverty Unit. They tried to justify this by saying they no longer needed a Child Poverty Unit because they've abolished the child poverty targets. So can he tell us what level of poverty he considers to be a success?
I'd say to the right honourable lady, this comprehensive schoolboy is not going to take any lectures from the party opposite about the lives of working people. What I would say is that we have introduced record increases in the national living wage, something that this party introduced, the party opposite failed to do so. And we have taken 1 million working age people out of poverty altogether. That is the record of my party, and one of which I am very proud.
Mr Speaker, the last Labour government made it their mission to reduce the number of children in poverty by 1 million. We achieved that. Under the Tories, child poverty is nearly back to the level it was when Labour last inherited the Tory mess. After 13 years of the Tories, they're stuck in a conveyor belt of crisis. And while his party is preparing for opposition with their Trump Tribute Act conference over the road, Labour are focused on fixing the real problems facing British people. The Tories have picked their side. They're for the vested interests, for the oil companies and the bankers, for those that are profiting from the crisis and not suffering from it. Whether it's failing the millions of people anxiously waiting for treatment or overseeing a rise in child poverty. And while his colleagues spout nonsense at their carnival of conspiracy, I want to know, when will his party stop blaming everybody else and realise that the problem is them?
Mr Speaker, I will proudly defend our record in office. Crime down 50%, near record levels of employment, a record minimum wage. And what, Mr Speaker, what's their record? 4 general election defeats, 30 promises already broken, and 1 leader who let anti-Semitism run wild. That is why the British people will never trust the Labour Party.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Would my right honourable friend please send his condolences to the family of Hilton Ward councillor Gillian Lemon, who at the young age of 52 tragically died partway through the election count on Friday. This means that the whole election for all 3 councillors has had to be voided, even though the returning officer was ready to declare 3 Conservative councillors for the Hilton Ward. Perhaps following this dreadful experience, my right honourable friend will confirm that the best way to thank councillor Gillian Lemon for her service is for the good people of Hilton Ward in South Derbyshire to vote again 3 times for the 3 Conservative candidates on Thursday the 15th of June.
Well, Mr Speaker, may I extend my deepest sympathies on behalf of these benches and the Conservative Party to Councillor Gillian Lemon's family. We all know how incredibly hard local councillors work, and she was a strong representative of South Derbyshire. And like my honourable friend, I do hope that the people of Hilton Ward will reflect on this by voting for Conservative candidates at the forthcoming election.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the SNP, Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2016, the Deputy Prime Minister told his constituents in a blog that it was his duty to, and I quote, furnish them with all the facts that are available with regards to Brexit. Today, Brexit Britain faces higher food prices, a lack of workers, a shrinking economy and a decline in living standards. Why is he happy to ignore those facts?
The Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, we have one of the fastest growth rates in the whole of the G7 since Brexit. And we all know, and in fairness, we all know the policy of the SNP And they said it this weekend, and I quote, "We need to undo Brexit." But let me tell you, if I were them, I'd start by undoing the mess they've left Scotland in and start working with the United Kingdom government and focus on the priorities of the Scottish people, not the priorities of their party.
Early Black.
Check the data.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing more deluded than that defence of Brexit is the Labour Party's support of it. Now, just today, the world's fourth largest car manufacturer said that Brexit was, and again I quote, "a threat to our export business and the sustainability of our UK manufacturing options." Even Nigel Farage can admit that Brexit has failed. So, Mr. Speaker, why can't he?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would say to the Honourable Lady, one of the best ways of getting behind industry in this country is get behind the trade deals we're striking with many countries around the world, which they have singularly failed to oppose. And I see last week the SNP promised to build a new Scotland. I don't know whether she's aware, but the SNP have been in power for 13 years. Perhaps they should stop their focus on independence and focus on the priorities of the Scottish people.
Esther McBee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency has a problem with travellers. My constituency has a problem with travellers pitching on private land and common land and causing a nuisance currently on Parkgate Industrial Estate in Knutsford. Either the police don't have sufficient powers to deal with this issue, or they do have sufficient powers but they're not using them. So will the Deputy Prime Minister get the government to speak with Cheshire Police to ensure that they do have the powers to deal with this plight on our local community and that they use them?
Well, the Right Honourable Lady, my Right Honourable friend, is absolutely right to highlight the misery caused by unauthorised encampments. I've seen this in my own constituency as well. I understand that Home Office officials do regularly liaise with the National Police Chiefs Council on this, but of course my Right Honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will have heard my Right Honourable friend's representations, and I trust she will act on those.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister will be aware of the ongoing concerns of unionists in Northern Ireland about our ability to trade freely within the United Kingdom and its internal market, given the continued application of EU law on the manufacture of all goods in Northern Ireland. We now have proposals for a future border operating model that could potentially create further barriers to trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Will the Deputy Prime Minister give me an assurance that the Government will, in law, protect Northern Ireland's ability to trade freely within and with the rest of the United Kingdom?
Yes, well, I would like to say that we've already shown a willingness to legislate to protect Northern Ireland's place within the Union, and we're committed to providing exactly the protections that the Right Honourable Gentleman refers to around Northern Ireland's unfettered access to the whole United Kingdom market. So I can give those assurances, and of course we stand ready to work with the Right Honourable Gentleman and representatives across unionism to reflect the further steps required to strengthen our precious union.
Angela Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the early hours of Saturday morning, I was out with Kathy, Peter, Joe and Tim, who volunteer as Guildford Street Angels. I paid tribute to them and all the volunteers who are out every weekend and in all weathers. But, Mr. Speaker, it's an absolute disgrace that the Liberal Democrat-run council shut the public loose. At night, there are no single-sex spaces for our young women, and they are seeking out dark, secluded areas if they're caught short, which is dangerous. They are at increased risk of sexual assault. Will my Right Honourable friend join me in calling for the immediate reopening of the town centre loos in Guildford?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this very important issue, and sadly, I'm afraid that's what one might expect from a Lib Dem-run council. I do join her in thanking the Guildford Street Angels for all of their efforts, and I'm sure that they and she will continue to make those views known to Guildford Borough Council.
GBNews.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Many of my constituents are struggling to pay the bills and put food on the table. Food prices have risen by over 19% in the last year, with the cheapest infant formula up 45%, gas prices up 129%, electricity up 67%. Many report borrowing more money than this time last year, with car manufacturers threatening to move production. The OBR saying 100 billion has been lost from the economy forever, and wages falling further and further behind basic living expenses. So does he really still believe his government's kamikaze Brexit is delivering for the people of these isles?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I certainly do believe that, Mr Speaker, and I would say to the members on those benches that it's only because of the strength of our United Kingdom that we're able to afford the sort of interventions, for example, that we've had with the cost of living, with over £3,300 for every single family in our United Kingdom, paid for by a 75% windfall tax on oil and gas companies. That's the United Kingdom delivering on the cost of living.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2016, we secured over £300 million for the modernisation of A&E services in Shropshire. 6 years on, that money has still not been spent and construction hasn't started. I have a real concern about the quality of managers within our local NHS trust, that this decision has not been taken. What can my right honourable friend do to help us in Shropshire to ensure that finally this £312 million is spent and that A&E services are modernised, because there is nothing more important than the safety of constituents when they go into A&E services?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I pay tribute to my honourable friend for raising this issue. I know that his constituents are anxious for building work to get underway as soon as possible. And I know that the Department for Health are working closely with NHS England and the Trust to support the development of the scheme. And the Trust is due to submit plans to the Department for Health in the coming months, and the Department will work at pace to review those plans.
Marshal de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Leaseholders in Battersea are trapped in an outdated and unfair leasehold system. The Secretary of State said, and I quote, "The government would absolutely maintain a commitment to abolish the leasehold system and would bring forward legislation shortly." But we now know that this is no longer the case. So, Deputy Prime Minister, why has the government yet again done another U-turn and yet again broken another promise to leaseholders to scrap its plans to end the outdated leaseholder system?
Well, I'd like to reassure the Honourable Lady and members of this House that the government is committed to reforming the leaseholder system to give homeowners greater control and give cheaper access to leaseholder renewal, including a 990-year extension with zero financial ground rent, and we will set out plans for further reforms later in this Parliament.
Sir Desmond Sway.
What would be a reason for extending the general election franchise to settle the EU citizens, a population of voters equal to the number in Wales?
Well, I think my honourable friend is referring to the plans from the party opposite. And it's actually quite interesting that this week, while we're pushing ahead with legislation to break the smuggling gangs, what's Labour's big idea? Give foreign nationals a say in our elections. So there we have it. While the Conservatives will stop the boats, Labour will rig the votes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was concerned to read last week that the Prime Minister had to be airlifted to a pharmacy in Southampton after suffering electoral dysfunction. Several weeks earlier, he flew all the way from Lancashire to Yorkshire by private jet. Meanwhile, angry rail commuters face the reality of cancellations, longer journey times, and are unable to get to work on time as operators shed services. The public think that the Prime Minister's got his head in the clouds. They're right, aren't they?
It is quite extraordinary, Mr. Speaker, to take lectures from the party opposite about the railways when actually the head of the train drivers' union actually sits on Labour's NEC. And indeed, she was described by the right honourable lady, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, as, quote, one of us. No wonder Labour won't stand up to the militant rail unions. They literally let them drive their policies.
Mr. Speaker, incredible regeneration work is taking place on Teesside, led by our Mayor, Ben Houchin. Sadly, we have seen a shameful attempt to smear the amazing Teesworks project, led by the Honourable Member for Middlesbrough, who I've given advance notice to. Will he confirm that it was always an integral part of the business case that the private sector should co-invest alongside government, and that the Teesworks arrangements themselves have been checked and approved by the government? And will he reconfirm his full support for the Teesworks projects, reassure investors, and join me in calling for the Labour Party to apologise for talking down Teesside?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct to raise this issue. It is the UK's first free port, and it continues to attract billions of pounds of private sector investment, creating jobs and supporting the local economy. And I think the whole House will see through the inexcusable attempts by the Labour Party to talk down those successes on Teesside, where local leaders are working tirelessly to improve that region for the first time in a generation.
Mr. Speaker, in 2011, the first year that the Tories came into government, 61,000 people received emergency food parcels from food banks. In 2022-23, that figure had gone up to nearly 3 million. 1 million of them children. It's gone up every year that the Conservatives have been in power bar one. So, will he tell the House, is that a record that he proudly defends?
I'm very proud of the fact that this government has given record numbers of people the opportunity to have jobs and employment, which is the surest route out of poverty. And it is the case that I believe up to 3.6 million new jobs have been created under this government.
Walker. Mr. Speaker, it's truly excellent news to see England rising up the international league tables for reading to become the highest performing country in the Western world. That's testament to the hard work of our teachers and the dedication of our honourable friend for Bognor to follow evidence-based policy. But this progress will only be sustained if children are in school regularly, able to learn. So can I strongly commend to him and to the government the 10-minute rule bill presented by my honourable friend for Meon Valley. It has cross-party support, delivers on key recommendations of the Education Select Committee and the Children's Commissioner. The government should adopt it as soon as possible.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight those brilliant figures which show that we've now jumped to the fourth best in the whole world for reading. And I certainly see in schools it's much, much more demanding than it was in my day, and that's tribute to the ministerial team that have done such a fabulous job. I will, of course, examine the details of the 10-minute rule bill to which he refers.
Tommy Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, it is an open secret that many in the Conservative Party would wish to roll back the democratic gains of devolution either in part or completely. The noble Lord Frost, former Minister, the architect of the disastrous Brexit agreement and now, I believe, seeking a safe Tory seat in this chamber, recently let the cat out of the bag when he said the government should review and roll back some devolved powers.
Just try it.
Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with him?
Hear, hear.
I would say to the honourable gentleman, the only thing that will destroy devolution is a vote for independence in Scotland, as advocated by those on those benches.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I congratulate my right honourable friend on a brilliant first performance at Prime Minister's Question. Will he keep the government laser-focused on the issues that matter to people like the cost of living in the NHS, and on the issues of the future, like artificial intelligence, which needs regulatory attention, and ignore the reactionary voices, no matter where they come from?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this. I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of this country in industries across the piece, including digital or indeed film and television in my own constituency. We're genuinely world-leading, creating high-quality jobs that we want our children or grandchildren to have.
Sean Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Half the children in Newcastle Central are growing up in poverty. Shocking. Over the last 5 years, the delivery of food parcels to North East children has risen by 250%. The number of North East children who are homeless rose by 50% last year. On average, their parents' wages will have fallen by £1,000, and if any of this affects their mental health, they face a 5-month wait for treatment. Why is his government making it so hard for our kids?
Well, I really think this House needs a correction on the facts, given what's come from the party opposite. It is the case that because of our national living wage, defined as more than at least 2/3 of median income, that's at its lowest point for years, and we've actually lifted 1.7 million people out of absolute poverty altogether. That is the track record of this government.
Gillis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The people of Longport and Burslem, as well as Port Hill and my neighbouring constituency neighbour of Newcastle and Lyme, are suffering because of cowboy waste disposalers like Staffordshire Waste, who have now been again done for having waste that was not meant to be on site and have been given a notice by the Environment Agency. What support can I get in holding these people to account and making sure that their retrospective planning application for a site that they're using, which they didn't get planning permission on before using, is rejected by Stoke-on-Trent City Council?
Well, my honourable friend is right to raise this this issue of those kind of people, and indeed we often see them associated with fly tipping, which is a blight on our landscape. I will ensure that I raise all the issues that he has raised with me with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, who has ministerial responsibility for this.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Crisis mental health services are in crisis. Patients and families gaslit and at risk. It is Mental Health Awareness Week, but no government awareness to ensure my constituents are safe, nor funding and workforce needs met. So why is his government sat on their hands with a devastating report sat on the Health Secretary's desk while patients in York and across the NHS are being failed? Can I and the Trust have an urgent meeting?
Well, I'm sure one of my ministerial colleagues in the health team will be happy to have that meeting. I would just say that under this government, we've put more money into mental health services, and actually we're funding 150 wider capital schemes. So this government has made mental health services a priority.
Final question, Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is Wales Tourism Week, an opportunity to celebrate one of Wales's most important businesses, which represents 10% of all jobs, supports Welsh farmers and food producers, and generates £6 billion in economic activity each year. Would the Deputy Prime Minister join me in thanking all those that work in the Wales tourism sector, and would he agree with me that this UK government's TIPS bill demonstrates its commitment to supporting the tourism sector, unlike Labour in Cardiff, whose proposed tourism tax will undermine visits and undermine jobs?
Well, of course, I'm most happy to give that commitment to my honourable friend. Indeed, I have spent many happy family holidays in Wales and plan to do so again next year.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
So that is PMQs, but just to remind you, we are expecting an urgent question from the Labour MP, Justin Madders, MP for Ellesmere Port, on the future of the UK car industry, bearing in mind what Vauxhall's parent company has described about the effects of the Brexit policies and indeed car battery production in detail. But just to up some, of course, on what we heard from the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Labour leader, some pre-planned lines, should we suspect, with Angela Rayner going with the whole issue of the Labour Party preparing to govern, while the Tory Party was starting to prepare for opposition. But Oliver Dowden coming back, accusing Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner as the Phil and Holly of British politics. Ouch. But I think we've just got this urgent question coming up now, so we'll head back to the chamber. Justin Madders.
Mr. Speaker. The automotive industry is vital
is a vital part of the UK economy, and it is integral to delivering on levelling up, net zero and advancing global Britain. After a challenging period where COVID and global supply chain shortages have impacted the international automotive industry, the UK sector is bouncing back. Production is increasing, and in 2022, the UK's best-selling car was a Nissan Qashqai built in Sunderland.
We are just awaiting Justin Madders to make that question, but just to reiterate, the whole issue is concerned with what we've heard from Vauxhall's parent company, Stellantis, who basically indicated that they may well have to effectively pull out of Ellesmere Port in his constituency because of the issue of battery production in the UK and Europe. That company also saying the Brexit deal was a threat to our export business and the sustainability of our UK manufacturing operations, wanting the existing rules over this issue extended to 2027. We do understand that Kemi Badenoch, the Trade Secretary, is attempting to do that with talking to both the EU and also speaking to the company itself, Stellantis. We still have in the studio here Chris Green for Conservatives, and I thought Justin Madders just about to take to his feet. Let's head back to the Commons.
Overnight are deeply concerning, not just for my constituents who work at Vauxhall Motors in Ellesmere Port, but for the automotive sector more widely. She will know the huge efforts that have been put in over recent years to secure the future of the plant and to move to electric vehicle production. Significant contributions have been made from the management, the workforce, the local authority and the government itself. So it's beyond frustrating that just a couple of years later we find ourselves once again in a position where there is a threat to my constituents' livelihoods. We know what needs to be done to secure jobs in Ellesmere Port and in the wider automotive sector, because the sector have been telling the government, as have we, that there needs to be a proper industrial strategy. So where is that industrial strategy? Indeed, where is the Secretary of State? The EU is pumping billions into manufacturing as part of its Green Industrial Plan. The US is investing trillions with the Inflation Reduction Act. We are being left behind, and every day this government sits on its hands, that mountain to climb gets a little higher. So we need urgent action. I'm afraid all I've heard this morning is complacency. We need those gigafactories with spades in the ground this year, because we know the timescales the industry invests across are long, and they need to see progress now. So can she tell us what steps the government are actively taking to increase the proportion of vehicle parts actually manufactured in the UK? And we need to make sure that our trading relationship with the EU is updated to reflect the global supply chain difficulties all manufacturing industry is facing. So can the Minister confirm if she plans to make a formal request to reopen negotiations with the EU on the trade and cooperation agreement? It has been made repeatedly clear that without changes to the future trading arrangements and without a proper industrial strategy, the UK car industry is at risk. So what assurances can she give to my constituents that their futures matter to this government? The UK car sector is the jewel in the crown of our manufacturing industry. If we lose it, it won't be coming back. So please, Minister, take action now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the honourable member will know that when I respond to this question, how, just as he does, how seriously I take the Secretary. I know we worked on this previously, and I agree the automotive industry is a vital part of the UK economy, and I will go on to explain all the work that we are doing now, and if we add them all up, it is more or less a very strategic strategy. We know that it's integral to delivering on our agenda for levelling up, which is why it matters to so many constituents, why there are so many MPs in the chamber here today. We know it matters to net zero and advancing global Britain. And I know how important it is to members of Parliament because of the number of people that work in the sector. Our automotive industry employs around 166,000, Mr. Speaker, people, and includes major manufacturers such as Jaguar Land Rover, Nissan, Toyota and BMW. We are leveraging investment from industry by providing support for new plants and upgrades to ensure that the UK automotive industry continues to thrive into the future. This includes Nissan's £1 billion North East electric vehicle hub, Ford's £280 million in Hellwood to make electric drive units, and Stellantis' £100 million investment in Ellesmere Port for an EV van production. We work closely with the sector through the joint government industry-led Automotive Council. I am indeed the co-chair, which discusses opportunities for growth, competitiveness and future opportunities. We also meet regularly with individual long-standing and new automotive companies to discuss a range of issues, including future investments. And talking about support from government, again, government and industry have jointly committed approximately £1.4 billion in innovative projects through the Advanced Propulsion Centre to accelerate the development and commercialisation of strategically important vehicle technologies, strengthening our competitive edge internationally. And we work along the Automotive Transformation Fund, which puts the UK at the forefront of transition to zero-emission vehicles. And of course, I mustn't forget the Faraday Battery Challenge, with an overall budget of £541 million since 2017, work to establish the UK as a battery science superpower. This is what keeps us at the forefront as we try and adapt and use new technology. I just want to put on record that our regular reviews of the EU TCA, but as my honourable friend will know, that responsibility sits within the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and is not something that I can respond to on their behalf. However, I can provide assurances that I and the... Well, I will just about to, if you allow me to continue. I can provide assurances that I and the Business and Trade Secretary have raised these issues with our colleagues across government and had productive conversations with our counterparts in the European Union. We are aware of the concerns from the UK and EU car makers about the challenges, and of course we continue to make strong representation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The automotive industry has been a huge success story for the West Midlands and can be so in the future as we transition to...
Well, that was a response from Nusrat Ghani with Kemi Badenoch, the Secretary of State, not in the chamber. We were being told earlier that she probably would be meeting today senior members of Stellantis, the parent company of Vauxhall, and clearly also trying to gauge some reaction or response from the EU in moving the existing rules, trying to extend that to 2027. Well, let's just reflect that we've got in our studio our panel of MPs, Chris Green for the Tories, and also we have Graham Stringer for Labour. First, Chris, just your reaction to the response. It seemed a bit hurried and, you know, read from a piece of paper rather than thinking it through in any detail.
Well, normally these are carefully prepared by working with the civil servants to make sure words of the Minister are precisely right, given the context we're facing. But I think Justin Madden's actually made a quite valid point. What he highlighted was the European Union and the United States are both massively subsidising the car industries and other industries. So when we in Britain expect to have free and open markets to be able to trade around the world and to locate manufacturing in the UK, they're actually breaking that kind of free market system, and the question is how we respond. So no doubt that's what Kemi Badenoch's looking at.
But also Nusrat Ghani reflecting that, you know, the only effective battery plant we got is Nissan up in the northeast. There's nothing else being built. British Volt is off-grid, as it may be at the moment.
Well, it's a huge question over the manufacturing, the supplies, the materials that need to be brought in. And again, it does come down to British Volt didn't go ahead over a question of subsidies from the government. So this is subsidies from taxpayers. So there's a big question over how we deliver.
Why would Jeremy Hunt not subsidise that, knowing what was happening, particularly in the United States?
So I don't know the details behind the business, and they've got to have confidence that the British Volt or whoever else can actually deliver in a way where the British taxpayer will get value for money.
Right, and Graham, obviously, in terms of Justin Madders, you know, there's worry about those jobs at Ellesmere Port, the Vauxhall plant. And in total, let's reflect, 800,000 workers across the whole British car industry?
We're all right to be worried about that. I don't think I've ever heard a minister, however well prepared the civil servants have made her notes, say we've got more or less an industrial strategy. I think the ambiguity about that is quite extraordinary when, as you say, so many jobs are at risk. Chris is right. The Americans, the European Union have changed from a free market model to huge
state subsidy.
$1 trillion in the case of the States, many hundreds of billions in the case of the EU. And we have to decide whether we're going to try and match with subsidy or we're going to stay with a free market model. The governments are paralysed, as they have been on so many issues.
Isn't it common sense, though, to fight fire with fire?
Depends how much it costs and whether you're going to win by trying to out-subsidise. You're not going to win against...
Because I seem to remember we poured rather a lot into British Leyland over the years, and that didn't exactly end with
There's a whole series
an
of
Austin Allegro, I think we got out of it at the end, didn't we?
But we're not going to out-compete the United States in terms of subsidy. They're a richer country per
Deeper
head than
pockets.
us. They're a huge country. So even as a percentage, we're not going to do that. So we need to do some thinking.
Right.
And as was said, we need a proper industrial strategy, not a more or less industrial strategy.
What about the tie-in of the Brexit and the industrial strategy? Sir Keir Starmer earlier was saying, the Brexit deal needs to be improved, not talking about going back into the EU. It wasn't oven-ready, it wasn't even half-baked. And it seems that Stellantis, the parent company, is agreeing with that.
From the initial deal when Boris Johnson took us out of the European Union, I think most people realised that the depth of our relationship with the European Union, which at the time, when we initially had the referendum, the argument from many people supporting us remaining in the EU is that we had a relatively shallow relationship. And actually, most of us knew it was a very deep relationship. And it's not when we're merging with the European Union over a 40-year period, we can expect moving away to take a long period as well. The question is when these issues come up, when these problems come up, that ministers have a very clear plan over how they're going to deal with it. Added to that, you then have these massive subsidies that the EU and the US are putting in, so it becomes very complicated. And then you throw electric vehicles and that whole future propulsion question that Nusrat Ghani highlighted. There's a number of things happening at the same time.
Do we stay with the internal combustion engine or do we go fully electric? I mean, that...
Well, personally, I would say until we actually have confidence in the new technology, we shouldn't really be planning to use it. But that's, I think, a different position to what the government has.
Yeah. OK. Well, let's just reflect too on PMQs. As I was saying, a couple of good lines, clearly pre-prepared. Angela Rayner didn't look very happy at being sort of likened to the Phil and Holly of British politics along Sir Keir Starmer.
She didn't. Can I give you one thought I had during the whole exchange in PMQs? The first thing that happened when I first became an MP a long time ago was that Tony Blair cancelled the twice-a-week PMQs.
Yes.
We used to have them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He wanted to clear his diary, so he did slightly more questions because you get more in half an hour than you do 2/4 of an hour sessions. But I actually think it was a bit tired from both sides today, and I think you would get sharper, more immediate contemporary questions if we went back to Tuesdays and Thursdays. I mean, Thursdays are dead in the House of Commons now. There is space there to hold the Prime Minister to account. I'm not answering your question, but I think it's a thought for the immediate future that we increase that accountability.
It's a very interesting point, and I wonder, did we learn anything more from those exchanges?
Well, I suppose the clearest thing, especially at the beginning of the exchanges between the two deputy leaders, is the anticipation of a general election. Oliver Dowden was highlighting that Angela Rayner may not be Keir Starmer's favoured choice because of flip-flopping on different policy areas and other agendas, and obviously Angela Rayner highlighting the difficult times we had in the local elections. So I think that anticipation and the caginess, how a lot of those questions were put to one another...
A bit of shadow boxing going on there.
They were, especially Oliver Dowden's first time in that kind of arena. It's a very difficult thing to deal with.
But just looking, though, at the issues of substance, I mean, certainly Angela Rayner going on child poverty and then the NHS waiting list. I mean, this is, both issues very difficult for the government, I suspect, on the doorsteps when they go electioneering, or have been for the local elections, of course.
Yes, both these subjects are very challenging for the government. We know part of the context, or a substantial part of the context, of where we are here with lockdowns. We know about the war in Europe having an impact on the cost of living, especially with food and heating. But we are spending more money now as a government than ever before. And the question for Labour, when they want to run the country, are they going to put up taxes? Are they going to be borrowing more to give families more money and to put more money in the NHS? And actually, they're quite scant on the details at the moment.
Yeah, and I was rather surprised, and maybe Angela Rayner was rather relieved that Dowden didn't come back on this announcement from Sir Keir Starmer about building on Greenbelt land, which one assumes is going to lose Labour a hell of a lot of votes across the so-called blue wall, where the Liberal Democrats may pick up votes instead.
That was a dog that didn't bark, isn't it? In that exchange. I think it's a complicated issue, green belt. People assume that green belt is always green land. It's not.
And I think Sir Keir Starmer was talking about car parks and others within this.
There is lots of green... The idea behind the green belt was to stop urban sprawl, and that means that often derelict land is included, and actually it forces housing investment in particular out into the countryside. Hampshire is a great example of that, where there's a tight green belt round Southampton, but it's meant more building on green land as opposed to... So I think it's a detailed policy that won't be immediately attractive to people, but I think when you look at it in detail, it will be a lot more attractive. And we need houses.
But it's something, obviously, that Conservatives have decided to actually walk away from pretty quickly, bearing in mind what a lot of people, particularly in the home counties, have been telling you.
I think in the south of England, they've got very distinct problems for the green belt, the way it's been applied. But I certainly know in Bolton, over many years, the Labour Council there was building on the green spaces. The Conservatives in Bolton have got huge ambitions, or had huge ambitions, for redeveloping the town centre. That work is happening. Unfortunately, Labour's just taken control of Bolton Council, so we have to see whether they start building on the green spaces again.
Yeah, and what that's going to do at the ballot box. I'm just reflecting, we are unable to replay some clips for you at the moment, but let's just reflect that Matt Hancock offered his congratulations to Oliver Dowden as a brilliant first performance at PMQs. Would you share that assessment in terms of your scores on the doors?
I think I was pretty happy with Oliver Dowden's delivery and the substance he had to share.
Right, I think we have got the clip now, actually, having just said that we're waiting. Here's Oliver Dowden a little earlier.
We all know what's going on with her and her leader. It's all lovey-dovey on the surface. They turn it on for the cameras, but as soon as they're off, it's a different story. They're at each other's throats. Mr. Speaker, they're the Phil and Holly of British politics.
The reality is, after 13 years of Tory rule, they're still lurching from crisis to crisis and wallowing in their own mess. They can't solve the crisis because they are the crisis.
So there we are. That's a little taste of what we had earlier. How would you mark Angela Rayner?
I think that particular clip shows Angela at her best when she's attacking. She's a very good...
Rather than reading something pre-prepared?
Yeah. She's very natural, she can be quite aggressive, and she's very good. There are times when she can be too long, preparation is too detailed. So I think she did well, as she nearly always does. I would think, I mean, it must be terrifying for the first time you stand in for the Prime Minister, for Oliver Dowden, and I think he got through it with a pretty straight bat.
Yeah, and interesting that he came up with a line about being a comprehensive schoolboy as well. He's not going to take lectures or lessons from someone.
No, that's a classic line from Michael Howard being up against Tony Blair. But I think the...
Cletty grammar, I think he was.
The elegance often with Oliver Dowden there is highlighting that divisions within Labour at the moment. Obviously, the divisions within Conservatives are relatively open, but the divisions within the Labour Party haven't yet been exposed. And so it's going to be really interesting over the coming year or so when Labour set out their policy agendas, if those divisions...
We've been unable to speak to Tom Harwood, our Deputy Political Editor, but I just wonder what you make of this fringe conference, this Conservative conference going on in Emmanuel Centre. Is it a distraction and is it rather unhelpful at this time?
No, I've only seen snippets of it. I haven't actually been there, but some of the contributions have been fantastic. And also, we are looking forward to a general election, and it's quite right that all parties should have healthy debates.
Well, and even if it's perhaps a flag being put up by Suella Braverman, you know, I'm your future Prime Minister instead of Rishi Sunak.
No senior politician can make a speech without saying this is a leadership run.
Right, OK. And in terms of how Labour is preparing, as Angela Rayner said, preparing for power, while the Tories are preparing for opposition, is that a little too overconfident at the moment?
I'm never confident before elections, even before the 97 and 2001 elections, which gave huge...
You still bear the scars.
Yeah, one always worries, but I think the Labour Party No political party is ever 100% united. It wouldn't be a British political party if it was. We thrive on debate. But I think the Labour Party at the moment is working through its policies, and it's more united than it has been probably for 20 years.
Which is not difficult, some would say, however. Yeah. Graham and Chris, thank you very much for your time. More coming up in this next hour. We reflect, of course, on the politics and asking that question, is it the end of the road for Britain's car industry? More coming up in a moment. Stay with us.
Hello again and welcome to your GB News forecast from the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. Another mostly fine day today with sunny spells for many. Rain for some, but much of the rain limited to the far north and northwest of Scotland as some weather fronts move in over the top of an area of high pressure, and it's that high pressure that is leading to a lot of fine weather elsewhere across the UK, with some decent spells of sunshine, but areas of cloud will build. And we will see the odd shower across northern, eastern and central parts of England. They'll be fleeting. I think for the vast majority it's going to be a fine afternoon. That is until the outbreaks of rain arriving in the far north and northwest of Scotland. Feeling cool here with a breeze from the southwest. Elsewhere, mid to high teens generally, perhaps the odd 20 Celsius in the far south. Any showers in the south tend to disappear into the evening and then clear spells for many. Thicker cloud for Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western parts of England. So a milder night on the whole, but where we do see some clear spells in the south, temperatures dipping into the single figures and in some sheltered spots, low single figures in the far south. Otherwise, it's 10, 11 Celsius as we start off Thursday. Those areas of cloud across Scotland bringing some outbreaks of drizzly rain, especially for the northwest of Scotland, and that becoming more persistent later in the morning as a weather front moves in. That also affecting western parts of Northern Ireland by the end of the afternoon. But elsewhere across the UK, another fine day to come. Again, the odd shower possible for central and southern parts of England, but plenty of sunny spells breaking out across the southern half of the UK and temperatures reaching 17 to 21 Celsius. Now, Thursday evening brings further outbreaks of light rain and drizzle for Scotland and Northern Ireland, that trickling into the far north of England by the end of the night. But it weakens as it runs into high pressure, and that high pressure tending to stick around for the weekend, so a lot of fine weather to come. Bye-bye.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Wednesday lunchtime. Could it be the end of the road for Britain's car industry? A warning that we could lose up to 800,000 jobs after one of the world's largest manufacturers says Brexit rules could mean closing their UK factory. We'll be hearing from former Brexit Secretary Lord Frost. A shake-up in the private rental market. The government wants stricter rules to protect the tenants. We'll have the details, but could it mean even fewer rental properties as landlords decide to shut the doors? The well-being of Britons dropping to lows last seen in the COVID pandemic. A major study finding the cost of living crisis is a driving factor behind failing mental health. Also coming up, all those arrests at the coronation scrutinised by MPs. And we'll hear how Just Stop Oil protesters disrupted those latest proceedings. First, an update on all the latest news headlines.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. One of the world's largest car manufacturers says the Brexit deal is threatening its business. Stellantis, which owns brands like Vauxhall and Citroën, says the current trade agreement affects its export and manufacturing operations in the UK. It says without changes, it will struggle to make electric vehicles at the Ellesmere Port and Luton plants. The company is urging the government to renegotiate rules on where parts are sourced. Business and Trade Minister Nusrat Ghani told the Commons the government is dedicated to strengthening trade within the industry.
I can provide assurances that I and the Business and Trade Secretary have raised these issues with our colleagues across government and had productive conversations with our counterparts in the European Union. We are aware of the concerns from the UK and EU car makers about the challenges, and of course we continue to make strong representation.
A man is due to appear in court charged with the murders of two people in Huddersfield. The bodies of 25-year-old Stephen Hornet and Katie Higdon, who was 27, were found with multiple injuries at a house on Monday. 34-year-old Marcus Osborne has also been charged with assaulting and detaining a second woman on the night the murders took place. So-called no-fault evictions are set to be scrapped as the government moves to strengthen renters' rights. As it currently stands, landlords can reclaim a property without giving tenants a reason. But the new bill gives renters more power to challenge that without losing their home. Renters will also be given the legal right to ask to have pets in their home, which landlords can't refuse without good reason. Well, the CEO of the National Residential Landlords Association, Ben Beadle, says evictions aren't as common as people might think.
What the Secretary of State has announced is that he will enhance powers to deal with antisocial behaviour, rent arrears, and make sure there are grounds for repossession when it comes to selling homes and landlords moving back in or one of their family members moving back in. That seems to me, if that's delivered upon, to be pretty much the status quo, bearing in mind that in 6% of cases, that's when landlords actually ask tenants to move in. So 94% of cases, tenants leave of their own accord.
The Bank of England has warned it will continue to raise the interest rate if the country fails to get a grip on inflation. Governor Andrew Bailey told the British Chamber of Commerce efforts have been made to tackle soaring costs, but the figure is still too high. Inflation remains above 10%. He says the Bank of England's commitment to the 2% target is unwavering. Mr. Bailey said inflation has come in higher than expected.
We do have very good reasons to expect inflation to fall sharply over the coming months, beginning with the April number, which will be released next Wednesday. Energy prices have fallen from their peaks, and that will start to come through as lower inflation.
Anti-monarchy group Republic says it never had any intention of disrupting the coronation. Giving evidence to a parliamentary committee, the group's CEO, Graham Smith, described the arrest on the morning of the event as a traumatic experience. Willamette Police told MPs arrests were made because officers were operating in what was described as a threat environment. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss is urging Rishi Sunak to brand China a threat to UK security. In a speech in Taiwan, Ms Truss called on the PM to not back down after he described Beijing as a long-term threat to Britain last summer. She also warned the West not to work with China.
And work with allies across the free world to challenge China's intimidating behaviour and also the economic coercion they're engaged with. And if there's one thing that I want to leave you with today, it is the fact that we need to step up that economic engagement with our key allies to be able to make sure that China isn't able to bully and coerce countries, and instead freedom and democracy will prevail.
Labour wants to give local areas the power to build houses on the Green Belt on the condition it won't impact beauty areas. Sir Keir Starmer will tell the British Chambers of Commerce that increasing housing supply would lead to lower prices. The party says it will restore a target of building 300,000 houses annually if it wins the next general election. Well, it comes as the Prime Minister was forced to drop plans for compulsory housing targets after backlash from rebel backbench MPs. The world's global average temperature is likely to surpass 1.5 degrees in the next 5 years. Well, that's according to the World Met Organization, which says if the rise is recorded, it would be the first time in human history. The agency has warned there's a 98% chance of breaking the record for the hottest year during that period. It's also forecasting the Arctic will warm 3 times faster than the global average. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Mark.
Rory, thanks very much indeed. So the government's had to answer that urgent question in the Commons in this past half hour on the future of Britain's car industry. It follows one of the world's biggest manufacturing groups warning that the current Brexit deal imperils the UK's car industry, in particular the electric car production. Well, Stellantis, which is the parent group of Vauxhall, say current arrangements are a threat to the sustainability of its UK operations. Well, Justin Madders, who's the Labour MP for Ellesmere Port, that's the home of the Vauxhall plant, was granted a question to the Business Minister, Nusrat Ghani.
So can you tell us what steps the government are actively taking to increase the proportion of vehicle parts actually manufactured in the UK? And we need to make sure that our trading relationship with the EU is updated to reflect the global supply chain difficulties all manufacturing industry is facing. So can the Minister confirm if she plans to make a formal request to reopen negotiations with the EU on the trade and cooperation agreement? It has been made repeatedly clear that without changes to the future trading arrangements and without a proper industrial strategy, the UK car industry is at risk. So what assurances can she give to my constituents that their futures matter to this government? The UK car sector is the jewel in the crown of our manufacturing industry. If we lose it, it won't be coming back. So please, Minister, take action now.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the honourable member will know that when I respond to this question, how, just as he does, how seriously I take the Secretary. I know we worked on this previously. And I agree the automotive industry is a vital part of the UK economy, and I will go on to explain all the work that we are doing now. And if you add them all up, it is more or less a very strategic strategy. We know that it's integral to delivering on our agenda for levelling up, which is why it matters to so many constituents, why there are so many MPs in the chamber here today. We know it matters to net zero and advancing global Britain. And I know how important it is to members of Parliament because of the number of people that work in the sector. We are aware of the concerns from the UK and EU car makers about the challenges, and of course we continue to make strong representation.
Let's get more with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, I'm not quite sure whether Justin Matters got what he was looking for there from Nusrat Ghani, but of course he was perhaps hoping Kemi Badenoch would be there as the Trade Secretary. But she, we understand, is actually meeting leaders from Stellantis, the Vauxhall parent company.
Yeah, indeed, I was at that urgent question. You're right in saying there was frustration that the Secretary of State wasn't there, given how important this issue is, though the Minister did allude to the fact that the Secretary of State is involved in some of these negotiations. They are happening at Secretary of State level. I think there are two issues clearly here at play, Mark. First of all, is this agreement with the European Union. Essentially, Vauxhall will be very clear in saying that they are blaming Brexit to a degree, but I'm not entirely sure why, because the agreement kind of works both ways, if you like, i.e. there is an expectation, more than an expectation, there is a demand that from next year, 45% of the value of an electric car has to originate in the UK or in the European Union. That is something that applies to everywhere inside the European Union and clearly to the UK, and that's going to increase to 65% by 2027. That's where the difficulty comes for the car manufacturers, because they argue that they're having to source lots of the material outside of Europe, most notably batteries. And batteries, the predominant market in batteries comes from China. But then there's a second thing at play here, Mark, which is a bit more urgent for the UK, is that we have got very, very little electric battery capacity or manufacture at all in this country. And so what the Labour opposition are trying to argue today is that the government should have seen this coming. It's been talked about for a long time, and frankly they need to fix this pretty urgently.
Yeah, because I think the only battery-producing plant we got at the moment is Nissan. The whole question, of course, of British Volt up in the air. And an indication, really, from Stellantis, this parent company of Vauxhall, that unless rules are extended to 2027, then the whole future of the British car industry may be in question, because basically there would be a tariff applied to any cars produced in the UK without these locally sourced parts included.
Yeah, indeed, and this is an industry that has faced a pretty tough couple of years, Mark. I mean, we've really not seen recovery really since Brexit in 2016. The number of cars manufactured in this country has declined every year since then. Now, clearly it was particularly hard hit during the pandemic when people frankly couldn't go into work to manufacture cars. But you're right in saying there is also wider concerns when you look around at what's happening. We know that Elon Musk was in northern France earlier on this week with Emmanuel Macron talking about opening a gigabattery, an electric battery factory there. And in recent times as well, Jaguar Land Rover, they're going to build a gigafactory in Spain. Nissan have decided that they're going to build their cars elsewhere as well. And I think what, again, people inside the industry and what politicians are saying is that when you look at what's happening across the field here in terms of investment, the EU, particularly the United States, with that Inflation Reduction Act, and also in China as well, are literally pumping billions and billions of pounds into their own industries to get... We say it's the future of cars, it's already here, but essentially electric cars are going to be front and centre of manufacturing in years to come. And the UK is simply not doing that, and we're going to get left behind. And that's where these hundreds of thousands of jobs, the entire industry, as you put it, could be at risk.
Darren, thank you for that for the moment. But let's now speak to motoring journalist and presenter and founder of electrifying.com, Ginny Buckley, who can join us. Ginny, great to speak to you once more. I know you and others have been warning that this was going to be happening. It was coming along the road pretty rapidly, and it seems to have hit the government full on.
I mean, I don't know why they're so shocked by it. You know, this has been coming for 4 years now, absolutely. And, you know, we've known that this legislation was happening. Sorry, as always happens on a live interview, the dog walker's just come in for the dog who jumped up on me. Let me get back to my train of thought. So, yeah, sorry, Mark. The UK... The government's known this was coming. We've known about it for 4 years. And I think what's happened and why it really matters now is because other countries around the world are really helping their car industry prepare for this. You know, so we've seen, you know, the EU stepping in. You know, your correspondent there mentioned the talks that Macron is having with Tesla. We've seen the US really supporting its car industry, pumping billions of dollars into the transition that it faces. And look, I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that from where I'm sitting today, it looks like the UK car industry is heading towards really, you know, a one-way street towards possible disaster. And the government seems unwilling or unable to step in and help it turn around, as we've seen happen in all those other countries around the world.
Yeah, we've got Professor David Bailey, who's at the Birmingham Business School, saying this is an existential threat to the UK car industry. And let's not forget, that's some 800,000 jobs. And we've only got, I think, Nissan producing batteries here in Britain at the moment. And perhaps no encouragement that Tesla's opened its first plant on the outskirts of Berlin. No suggestion that any major manufacturer wants here to come here to Britain to build these electric cars.
Exactly. And we have such a strong history of building cars in the UK. We should be incredibly proud of this industry. The government should want to support it, because as we transition, you know, for car makers to stay relevant, to stay profitable, they will go to where the batteries are being produced. And the batteries are being produced in places like China, in Korea, in Japan, in America. You know, there are over a dozen gigafactories at the moment in production in America. And, you know, these factories cost billions to build. You know, the latest figures I saw for one that Tesla's producing in Mexico is around $10 billion. So, you know, this takes incredible investment. And quite frankly, the UK government needs to step up to the table and stop talking and stop acting like they haven't seen this coming, and start putting some plans in place to get that investment here in the UK so we can protect those vital British jobs.
However, there is also the question is this the answer? Bearing in mind the EU now looking at the internal combustion engine continuing, manufacturers such as Ferrari saying, you know, that the engine is not dead effectively, but with a sort of more green or biofuel future, if you like.
I mean, there's no doubt that as we move ahead to 2030 and beyond, there will be a mix of fuels in use. You know, electric cars aren't going to be the only answer and the only solution, but they are going to be the answer for the mass market. You know, it's very easy for premium manufacturers like Ferrari to talk about these synthetic fuels. They are incredibly expensive to manufacture, incredibly expensive to buy. They may well be an option for those people running supercars. But for the majority of us, for the mass market car driver, it's going to be electric cars. And this is where the problem lies, you know, because electric car batteries make up for around 40 to 60% of the value of the car. You know, they're an incredibly expensive component, but we do need to produce them to stay competitive. And I think, Mark, it's just always worth remembering the human cost. You know, you've, of course, talked about the jobs. 800,000 people around the UK rely on the automotive industry. But there's also the car buyer in the middle of this as well. And we know that electric cars are already really expensive. There's only a handful of electric cars on sale under £30,000. You know, if these tariffs come in, if this tax comes on, then it's the car buyer that's going to bear the brunt of that. And that's going to come at a time when British car buyers really can't afford to be paying any more.
Indeed so. Ginny, as ever, thank you very much. We'll let you go off and get the dog its lunch, because Clea's getting a bit hungry. Thank you. We'll speak to you again soon. Now, let's reflect on an issue that's starting to come to the fore, bird flu, where bird flu in humans has been detected at an English poultry farm. 2 workers came into contact with infected poultry. Avian flu not the only concern, too, for those working in this agricultural sector, because a new report shows dog attacks on farm animals has risen to nearly 2 million last year. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley has been investigating.
With the rise in reports of dogs causing death or stress to livestock in fields, North Yorkshire Police are campaigning for owners to keep their pets on a lead when walking near to cattle and sheep.
If you're out walking your dog, especially in the countryside, please put your dog on a lead. It is that simple. Make sure you've got full control of the dog. This isn't just knowing that, oh, I can call my dog back and it'll come. It has to be on a lead, has to be secure. If your dog gets into a field and starts worrying livestock and you cannot call that dog back or you're not present, the farmer can and will shoot the dog to protect its livestock.
Livestock worrying is a crime with a £1,000 maximum fine, and it's an offence that hits farmers not just financially, but also emotionally.
The financial burden came to nearly £2 million in 2022 for the cost of livestock worrying. This is something which we simply can't afford. But actually, the impact on the farmer is huge. Farmers are already stressed and have big financial constraints, big input costs, and to have this extra burden on them causes sleepless nights, worry, and actually just tops up all the other challenges that they're facing already.
It's devastating for farmers to discover their sheep dead or attacked, and as livestock worrying is rarely reported by dog owners, the farmer often has no legal recourse.
I went to one farmer who had about 20 young lambs that had been worried across a field, and they'd gone into one fence and then bounced off the other fence, and a lot of them had been strangulated and a lot of them had just passed from pure exhaustion. Because there was no sign of a dog attack, it was even more frustrating because they'd literally been run until they were tired and they just died on the floor. So it was like a horror film when we saw them because they were all just laid out.
The UK sheep sector is at risk of being permanently forced to live with dog attacks, according to the National Sheep Association. Their 2023 survey of 305 sheep farmers showed 70% had experienced a sheep worrying attack in the last 12 months, with 95% suffering up to 10 cases per year.
A lot of farmers just think now they're becoming resigned to it and they think that it's becoming norm. And they're having to accept it. And it's even leading to fewer reports being made to the police because they're not sure they can do anything about it. The Kept Animals Bill is proposing to increase improve, raise police powers to go in and seize dogs and to take DNA samples and things like that. That's very, very welcome.
So the message from police and farmers this summer is to keep dogs on a lead whilst enjoying what the countryside has to offer. Anna Riley, GB News.
Happy in the field there. Now, let's reflect that coming up here on GB News Live, we'll be talking about a study that's found the sense of well-being amongst us has dropped to those lows experienced during the COVID pandemic. We'll be cheering you that up then in a moment. All the details for you.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Oh, welcome back to GB News Live on what is Mental Health Awareness Week. Now, many people have been admitting facing growing anxieties on a daily basis. Cost of living crisis, of course, hitting many. Well, some companies, such as TikTok, introducing mental health hubs to allow users to learn about well-being or find support groups. But a survey has shown that a quarter of us Britons now say happiness has declined in the past year. The biggest drop, 36% in the capital, in London. Let's go to our national reporter Paul Hawkins, who's there, and join our West Midlands reporter too, Jack Carson, in Cannock in the Midlands, which is one of the happiest, it seems. But let's go glum first and join Paul. Paul, why are Londoners so miserable, it says here?
Yeah, I think they'd like to describe it as least happy or less happy, and the big reason is because of the cost of living. At least that's what this survey shows, and especially when it comes to rent, when it comes to how much Londoners spend on rent, which is over a third of their income, there is a real squeeze in London. Certainly wages are a little bit higher in London than the rest of the country, but that's not compensating for the huge increase in rent. Just to give you an idea, Mark, Rightmove said that to rent a property in London, £2,501 a month. That's a rise of 14% year on year. The national average is £1,190. So big problem renting housing in London. It causes Londoners a lot of stress, and this is what they've been telling us about how they're feeling and why they might be feeling unhappy.
I've been there probably about a year and a half, but I've had other friends who got good deals in COVID and they've had to move out because of the rent increase of like 30-odd%.
Yeah.
And people are looking at moving away out of London.
Are you thinking about that?
My tenancy doesn't end for another 8 months, so you just hope that it's all right.
But it's got to. I mean, you must spend a lot of your income on rent.
Yeah. You do.
Yeah.
But,
and despite the money worries, which obviously is tough for everyone, would you say that you're feeling happy?
well, it's the sun shining. I'm still alive, so happy enough.
And living in Germany, do you have any worries about work, money, career?
Okay. For me, not. I'm working at the Federal Police.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and for me, it's my perfect work-life balance, I think. Yeah. I love my work and everything around Germany.
Yeah,
I have no worries.
Interesting then that guy thinks that Brexit could be a reason for some Brits feeling unhappy. Some critics of Brexit might argue in a long-winded way that that's been one of the contributory factors when it comes to economic growth. It could be a reason why public services have been flagging with less tax revenue. You could draw a tenuous link there.
Yeah.
But certainly when it comes to feeling happy, we should also state, Mark, be very clear about this, that happiness is a temporary state and it's okay not to be happy.
Right, we'll just let that sink in as everyone counts the pennies, of course. But let's cheer ourselves up by going to Cannock and join Jack there. And Jack, is it because life is a bit, less expensive up there?
Well, I think that's definitely a factor, Mark. When you look here and as you move further up north away from London, the house prices certainly become a little bit more respectable with the average price here in Cannock just over £200,000. That's certainly more accessible to a lot more people than it is necessarily down in London. But of course, as you move into places like this in the West Midlands, where you've got more countryside, more open space, some people have been telling me here the feeling of community is a lot better. But I've been speaking to people on the street today, and here's what they've been telling me about why they are happy here.
I don't know, I think there's just lots to do. I mean, Birmingham's gone through a massive regeneration time recently, hasn't it? We're local to here. We've got a lovely area called Cannock Chase, so just miles and miles of countryside. I'm really happy. I think ever since I've been on HRT the last 3 years, I'm even more happier.
There's a lot of greasy food. People seem to enjoy that.
So is that 17% of the West Midlands say they're unhappy. That's the lowest in the country according to this study, done by the Health, Wealth and Happiness Index. It says that it also links to screen time and some of the anxiety and of course mental health issues that might lead to. On average, Britons spend around 4 hours outside of work on their screens. 2/5 of those that say they spend more than 6 hours say they have seen a mental health decline. So that might be an issue as to why some people certainly feel a little bit more unhappy. But here in the West Midlands, I've got a bowling green next to me, I've got a bandstand behind me, I've got flowers in bloom. Here in the West Midlands, it's not so much doom and gloom.
What more could you want? Paul looking very envious there in London. But gentlemen, both thank you very much indeed. We'll update people on that happiness meter throughout the afternoon. Thank you. Well, certainly people not very happy in Italy and Croatia. Certainly severe floods that has killed at least 5 people so far. And in this past hour, the organisers of the Formula 1 Grand Prix Emilia-Romagna saying it's cancelled because of severe flooding in Italy. Thousands more people have been evacuated from areas in northern Italy and Croatia. We're saying the Italian government saying that the FIA, the body overseeing the Grand Prix, had to cancel the event to concentrate all efforts on coping with an emergency. Italy's Civil Protection Agency issuing a red alert weather warning for the region on Monday. We're also being told in the mountains where the Giro d'Italia, the cycle race, has been going on, avalanche warnings as well, despite this, of course, being well into May. More homes being flooded, we're told, in Bosnia and Croatia. In one Bosnian town, we can no longer count the flooded buildings. It's never been like this. We'll update you on more, but as we say, the Grand Prix definitely off this weekend. Still to come, police getting a grilling from MPs over those arrests made ahead of the coronation. We'll be reflecting on what we've heard in the House of Commons. First, let's get an update on the news headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. The latest from the GB newsroom. Stellantis, which owns brands like Vauxhall and Citroën, says the current Brexit deal is threatening its export and manufacturing operations in the UK. It says without changes, it will struggle to make electric vehicles at the Ellesmere Port and Luton plants, while the company's urging the government to renegotiate rules on where parts are sourced. A man is due to appear in court charged with the murders of 2 people in Huddersfield. 25-year-old Stephen Harnett and Katie Higton, who was 27, were found with multiple injuries at her house on Monday. 34-year-old Marcus Osborne has been charged with assaulting and detaining a second woman on the night as well. That's the night the murders took place. So-called no-fault evictions are set to be scrapped as the government moves to strengthen renters' rights. Well, as it currently stands, landlords can reclaim a property without giving tenants a reason. But the new bill gives renters more power to challenge that without losing their home. Anti-monarchy group Republic says it never had any intention of disrupting the coronation. Giving evidence to a parliamentary committee, the group's CEO, Graham Smith, described the arrest on the morning of the event as a traumatic experience. The Met Police told MPs arrests were made because officers were operating in what was described as a threat environment. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
All right, let's take a quick look at today's markets. The pound, that'll buy $1.2464 and €1.1509. The price of gold, that's sitting at £1,593.92 per ounce. And the FTSE 100, that is at £7,742.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Channel.
Well, welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the government's had to answer an urgent question in the Commons on the future of Britain's car industry. It's after one of the world's biggest manufacturing groups warned that the current Brexit deal imperilled the UK's car industry, in particular electric car production. Stellantis, the parent group of Vauxhall, saying current arrangements were a threat to the sustainability of its UK operations. That, in detail, is Ellesmere Port, where it manufactures its cars. Well, former Brexit Minister Lord Frost can join us now. Lord Frost, in terms of what we heard in reaction from the government, Business Minister Nusrat Ghani, the government would not be drawn as to whether the government will seek to reopen negotiations with the EU on post-Brexit trade arrangements.
Well, obviously, it would not be sensible to reopen the entire trade agreement. This particular issue was one of the last to be settled in 2020. The car industry was happy with it at the time, but obviously a lot's changed in the energy electric vehicle world since then. Let's see. if the government does decide they want to see if this problem can be fixed, well, it's a good test of whether our new, warmer relationship with the EU can actually deliver anything.
Yeah, it begs the question, though, was that last-minute part of the deal rushed in that surely someone should have looked forward to what, was going to happen in terms of electric car production? Because we gather Kemi Badenoch is now trying to extend the current deal until 2027. It's not a very good look, is it?
Well, I don't agree, actually. We spent a lot of time working through this issue for most of 2020, and the fact that it settled at the end just means that it was one of the most difficult. As I say, the car industry welcomed this at the time and felt the problem had solved, but a lot has happened in the energy world. Costs have changed massively, so obviously there's a new and slightly different problem. But, we are friends and neighbours with the European Union, and let's see if we can solve this problem together.
Is it then a different story of the government failing to ensure that we've got sufficient domestic production of car batteries, which is part of this problem about I think 45% of the car has to be domestically produced, or at least parts produced in the UK or EU?
Well, I mean, values have changed, I think. I haven't seen the full detail of the Vauxhall-Stellantis case, but I assume the problem is that relative prices have changed, the costs of certain elements of production have gone up, and that's what's generated the problem. But in general, I'm not in favour of the government directing production or trying to pick winners. I think we need more free marketism in this country and not sort of supporting products that cannot necessarily pay their way, and we saw that with one of the battery factories earlier this year. We need productive industry, not ones that rely on government support.
Well, are you then signing the death warrant for Britain's car industry and 800,000 jobs, bearing in mind the extra help that the US is giving to its car industry, bearing in mind that Tesla's first European plant is already up and running on the outskirts of Berlin in Germany?
Well, we've got a very big car industry and a very big and productive one. I think if we were going to look at public policy, we might look at the rush to ban internal combustion engines and the insistence on having electric cars. And there perhaps we could learn a little from the European Union, which has decided it doesn't want to rush at this in quite the same way. Maybe we should do the same.
Yeah. So would you share Nigel Farage's assertion that Brexit has failed to live up to its potential because of, quote, useless Tory politicians mismanaging the exit from the EU? Seemingly, this example of the car industry being part of that.
Well, no, I mean, Nigel is a hero of the Brexit movement, but I wouldn't agree with him on that. Brexit succeeds because it gives us back democracy and the ability to determine our own affairs. And merely because a particular set of politicians or party, don't deliver everything that's needed straight away, that doesn't mean the project's failed. It means we need to renew our strengths and get things right and move forward, get on with reform, deliver the expectations that people want us, and that's what I think we still need to do and we still can do.
OK, well, talking about expectations and managing to do things, you are at this conference, which many in the Tory party itself have indicated is a distraction at a time when the government is trying to fight fires on all fronts.
I don't think it's a distraction. I think it's a great event which is allowing us to debate ideas and what conservatism, Toryism, the future of conservatism in this country is all about, and we need to do quite a lot more of that. It's obvious that at the local elections a couple of weeks ago, quite a lot of our supporters sat on their hands and didn't come out and vote for us. That's why we only got 26% of the vote. We need to find policies that appeal to Tory voters, get people out voting, campaigning for us, and this conference can be part of that effort.
And would that include the assertion that legal migration is too high, which is what we heard from Suella Braverman there at that conference, the Home Secretary, whereas the Cabinet, seemingly the government of the day, don't agree with her?
Well, I don't know what has happened in cabinet discussions, but I understand it to be the policy of the Conservative Party and the government that legal migration should fall. That is the policy on which we fought and won an election. I think it still needs to happen. So I do agree with Suella, and I think actually most Conservative voters in the country believe that migration should fall rather than go up very sharply as it has done in the last year or two.
Even when there are many senior ministers saying that actually net migration can help to boost the economy?
Well, bringing an extra worker in obviously increases the size of the economy, but it doesn't necessarily do anything about income per head. The problem this country has is that we haven't invested in skills because we've had basically an indefinite supply of labour from the European Union and now elsewhere. And what we need to do is get people in this country back to work. We need to upskill people. We need to make the country more productive. That is the only way forward that is going to make people actually richer. Anybody can make the economy larger. What you want to do is make it more productive for every person in that economy. And at the moment, we haven't been doing that. We haven't done that since 2008. That's why everybody feels poorer. That's why everyone's grumbling about low incomes, why we have so many strikes. We need to get producing efficiency once again.
OK, and bearing in mind, obviously, what we heard at PMQs today, I think Angela Rayner describing the conference as a Trump tribute act. Those people are suggesting your appearance there is maybe for you to prepare to come back to power in the Commons as an MP. Is that correct?
Well, it's not connected with that. I am on the list of Conservative candidates, as became clear this weekend. I haven't applied to any seat yet, and we'll see where things happen. And it is true that British politics is in the Commons, really, and if you want to be properly in the political debates, you have to be in the Commons. But this conference isn't in any way about me or any single person. It's about debating the ideas that we need to succeed.
And does that, the reason being that you don't think that the Tory party is going to win this next election?
Well, we scored 26% of the vote 2 weeks ago, and parties that score that much of the vote don't win general elections. So we've got to get it up, and I do think that is possible. This election is there to be won, but we have to deliver policies that our supporters want to see, and policies that are going to make a difference for hard-working people in this country. And I hope we will do that in the next year.
Lord Frost, thank you for speaking to us on GB News. A lot of noise is off, I know, there in more ways than one, but hope that you could hear us loud and clear. We could certainly hear you loud and clear. Thanks very much for your time. Lord Frost there at the conference. More reaction to that as we get it. But elsewhere on the political front, renters set to get more rights to stand up to unfair landlords, all part of the government's new rental reforms. But, of course, a housing crisis looming and fears that the shake-up could push landlords into selling up, leading to a shortage of properties to rent and, therefore, rents going up again. So what exactly is the Renters Reform Bill? Well, a ban on so-called no-fault evictions so that landlords will not be able to evict tenants who've done nothing wrong but just complained, and easier for landlords to repossess properties for missed rent or antisocial behaviour. Tenants also to get more rights to keep pets and a new watchdog to resolve disputes. Well, earlier the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, was asked about the possibility of antisocial behaviour being used by landlords as an excuse to unfairly evict those tenants.
Courts decide what antisocial behaviour is, and we're not talking here about simply being disagreeable. We're talking about the sustained pattern of behaviour that makes life a misery for your neighbours, and it's right that landlords should be able to evict people when they are behaving in an antisocial way. It's not just the case that their property needs to be protected, other tenants need to be protected as well.
Michael Gove speaking to us a little earlier. So, good or bad? Let's speak now to housing researcher at think tank Bright Blue, Bartek Staniszewski, who joins us in the studio. Thank you for your time. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways?
I think in general this renters reform bill is a good development. I think there are promising things both for landlords and for tenants in this bill. As Michael has said there, this bill empowers landlords to evict tenants using their Section 8 powers, which permit them to evict antisocial tenants who engage in genuinely antisocial behaviour. But it also empowers good tenants by abolishing Section 21, which permits for those no-fault evictions.
OK, and the fear was that if you complained about your landlord, you'd basically be shown the door pretty quickly previously.
Yes, I suppose that could be one of the fears, although no-fault evictions can result from a variety of causes. One that has been raised also quite recently in the news is the case of holiday short-term rentals in holiday hotspots.
Airbnbs?
Yes, indeed. And there are cases of landlords using their Section 21 powers to evict tenants who are perfectly good tenants and needed a family home to use them as Airbnbs.
Now, it's interesting on the bigger sort of political picture that Labour and Keir Starmer said the reforms are broadly right, so cross-party agreement on the particular issue. But there is a concern that all these added restrictions could persuade more landlords to shut up shop, to sell up, and therefore the rental sector, what's it, 11 million people or 11 million tenants across Britain at the moment, will have even fewer houses or flats to choose from.
Indeed, and I think this is a valid concern. However, I would not overreact. As I have mentioned, this bill empowers both tenants and landlords by increasing the landlord's Section 8 powers to evict genuinely antisocial, genuinely harmful tenants. And also, I would not overestimate the importance of overregulation in terms of the rental market, given that the vast majority of costs that landlords suffer is caused by land prices.
Yeah, and is this the issue actually as well? It's what people have to pay in rents at the moment. I mean, I couldn't see anything about rent control here, for instance, in terms of just making the sector more affordable to people.
Indeed, and, you know, I think this rent controls would be one of those heavy-handed measures that Conservatives, I think rightly, should perhaps avoid, and the historical record in terms of rent controls.
What, let the market find its own level, you mean?
To a degree, you know, this bill, of course, regulates the market in some ways, but it does not go too far. I think it strikes a golden mean. It empowers both tenants and landlords.
OK, thank you very much indeed for taking us through there. I think, you know, a thumbs up, perhaps, at the end.
Yes, indeed.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
More reaction, of course, as it comes through the afternoon. But let's reflect now that the Home Affairs Committee in the Commons has been hearing evidence today on those arrests made on the coronation. Chief Executive of Republic, Graham Smith, stating that the protest group had given the Met Police all the information they could, but it made no difference, he said, to the traumatic arrests. Well, the proceedings then disrupted briefly by Just Stop Oil.
So it sort of links together and then there's a combination on it. So it would have been unusual, which I think is why it would have aroused suspicion of the officers.
You usually use a combination lock to stop.
We're here today because our democracy...
Come on, officer. Come on, officer. Do your job. Come on. Officer. No, we're not having this. Come on, officer.
I think you could tell the response there, but the proceedings did continue, and certainly questions still being asked of the Met as to how they applied the new regulations under the Public Order Act. In terms of the King and Queen, however, they've been visiting Covent Garden today, as well as meeting artists and performers from the Royal Opera House. Joining us now, Cameron, our royal correspondent, and certainly they weren't locking on anywhere. They were able to move freely about.
Yes, they certainly were. There were no Republican protesters either. It was a secret engagement until, obviously, they turned up. So it was a bit of a surprise for just members of the public who are out and about doing their shopping, or indeed tourists in Covent Garden.
Well, it's a bit of a mecca for tourists, isn't it?
It is. It's described as a vibrant hub, actually, by Buckingham Palace, which is one of the reasons as to why the King and Queen decided to use their first joint engagement post-coronation to visit
Oh,
such
it's
a
their
London
first one
hub.
together?
It is indeed.
Because we saw the King, I think, at the Whittle unit at Cambridge, didn't he, fairly soon after the coronation?
We did, but this is the first time we've seen the King and Queen together. You see some pictures there of them doing a bit of a walkabout. They met local communities, members of local communities, you can see there, business leaders, market traders and arts organisations. They also visited St Paul's Church, which is known as the Actors' Church, to mark their 390th anniversary. And actually on the theme of something that the Queen is very passionate about, tackling domestic violence and supporting those who have experienced it.
This is a theme now with her, isn't it?
It certainly is, and this is what she was doing today. So she did, as part of this wider Covent Garden engagement, the Queen actually spent time with the church's Drama for Healing group, which was established a couple of years ago, which primarily works with women who have experienced domestic violence and kind of supports them through drama classes in the Actors' Church. So shining a light on an issue the Queen cares about.
Are we getting an indication that they are going to be a double act?
I think perhaps. I think we'll still see them do their individual engagements for the passions they care about. However, I think they're very much a unit. It's very obvious, I think, that the King is a lot happier now that he's got the
we are
Queen
told
by
that
his
personally
side.
she's very supportive of him in these circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the last year we have seen how her ability to perhaps calm him down
when pens don't quite work.
Pens don't quite work, or carriages arrive early, or there's sons late of a coronation. She does have the ability to calm him and keep calm and carry on. So yes, I think he's very happy to have the Queen by his side. So I think we'll see a mix of engagements together, but also separately as well for their various organisations, charities.
Yeah, and that looks a tasty treat on offer there as well. So an indication perhaps that there was a little bit of preparation for the royal visit, perhaps.
Yes, there certainly was. I think some of us certainly knew it was going on, but for security reasons, can't be too. You have to be a bit careful. But of course, this is all going on as the committee is going on in Westminster, interrupted by Just Stop Oil, where the CEO of Republic is basically saying what happened to him on the day of the coronation. He was arrested, he says, falsely by the Metropolitan Police. Metropolitan Police are saying that they're very much using their powers to make sure everybody was safe on the day.
Yeah, still a little controversy of that. Of course, we'll reflect on that a little later. Cameron, for the moment, thank you. But let's just update you on this extraordinary flooding happening in Europe. The Formula 1 Grand Prix in Italy cancelled because of the severe conditions this weekend. 8 people have died. There's extraordinary pictures of people being rescued. Thousands, indeed, evacuated from rooftops. There's also some footage available of a toddler being rescued there from the floodwater. This is for northern Italy, but we're also being told Croatia hit, Bosnia as well. Some areas reportedly receiving half their average annual rainfall. That's for the entire year in just 36 hours. Well, you can see what it's done here to the landscape. The government in Italy, in particular, calling on the organisers of the Grand Prix, the FIA, to cancel the event, quote, to concentrate all efforts on coping with the emergency. Well, you can see there are some crowds already there for the practice sessions, but you can see the rain on the track. We're told the rainfall itself is easing, but river levels still rising and many more rescues still taking place. So given the number of, obviously, emergency services needed at the Grand Prix, they're being diverted for far more important reasons, as you can see. So we'll update you with that situation. Well, there we are. Emilia-Romagna, the Italian Grand Prix this weekend cancelled, and those operations still underway to try to rescue thousands of people. We'll keep you updated on that. Also coming up in this next hour, we'll have the latest on Britain's car industry. Is it the end of the road for 800,000 workers, all to do with car batteries? Updating on that in this next hour. Stay with us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends were like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Wednesday afternoon, a Brexit warning from the owners of Vauxhall: renegotiate the deal or risk losing Britain's car industry. The government forced to the Commons to allay concerns, but the former Brexit negotiator, Lord Frost, tells us the rush to net zero to blame rather than the way we left the European Union. 5 people killed, several others missing after heavy rain causes flooding across Italy, Croatia and Bosnia. The Italian Grand Prix due this weekend now cancelled. The well-being of Britons drops to lows seen last in the COVID pandemic. We're in a Midlands town where people are cheerful, and our capital city where they're very miserable. Also coming up, the arrests at the coronation scrutinised by MPs, but how Just Stop Oil stopped that hearing inside the Commons. Details coming up. First, let's get all the news headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. The latest from the GB newsroom. One of the world's largest car manufacturers said the Brexit deal is threatening its business. Stellantis, which owns brands like Vauxhall and Citroën, says the current trade agreement affects its export and manufacturing operations here in the UK. It says without changes, it will struggle to make electric vehicles at the Ellesmere port and the Luton plant as well. The company is urging the government to renegotiate rules on where parts are sourced. Business and Trade Minister Nusrat Ghani told the Commons the government is dedicated to strengthening trade within the industry.
I can provide assurances that I and the Business and Trade Secretary have raised these issues with our colleagues across government and had productive conversations with our counterparts in the European Union. We are aware of the concerns from the UK and EU car makers about the challenges, and of course we continue to make strong representation.
So-called no-fault evictions are set to be scrapped as the government moves to strengthen renters' rights. Well, as it currently stands, landlords can reclaim a property without giving tenants a reason. But the new bill gives renters more power to challenge that without losing their home. The reforms will also strengthen landlords' rights to throw out tenants for antisocial behaviour, which Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove told us is not about being disagreeable.
Talking about the sustained pattern of behaviour that makes life a misery for your neighbours, and it's right that landlords should be able to evict people when they are behaving in an antisocial way. It's not just the case that their property needs to be protected, other tenants need to be protected as well.
A man is due to appear in court charged with the murders of 2 people in Huddersfield. The bodies of 25-year-old Stephen Hornet and Katie Higton, who was 27, were found with multiple injuries at a house on Monday. 34-year-old Marcus Osborne has been charged with assaulting and detaining a second woman on the night the murders took place as well. The Bank of England has warned it will continue to raise the interest rate if the country fails to get a grip on inflation. Governor Andrew Bailey told the British Chamber of Commerce that efforts have been made to tackle soaring costs, but the figure is still much too high. Inflation is still above 10%, but he says the Bank of England's commitment to the 2% target is unwavering.
We do have very good reasons to expect inflation to fall sharply over the coming months, beginning with the April number, which will be released next Wednesday. Energy prices have fallen from their peaks, and that will start to come through as lower inflation.
Anti-monarchy group Republic says it never had any intention of disrupting the coronation. While giving evidence to a parliamentary committee, the group's CEO, Graham Smith, described the arrest on the morning of the event as a traumatic experience. The Met Police told MPs arrests were made because offenders were operating in what was described as a threat environment. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss is urging Rishi Sunak to brand China a threat to UK security. In a speech in Taiwan, Ms Truss called on the PM to not back down after he described Beijing as a long-term threat to Britain last summer. She also warned the West not to work with China.
Work with allies across the free world to challenge China's intimidating behaviour and also the economic coercion they're engaged with. And if there's one thing that I want to leave you with today, it is the fact that we need to step up that economic engagement with our key allies to be able to make sure that China isn't able to bully and coerce countries, and instead freedom and democracy will prevail.
The Defence Secretary says it's important to signal to Russia that the UK has no objection to supplying Ukraine with what it needs. Speaking at a news conference in Germany, Ben Wallace said Britain will support the process of any nation that wants to help the war-torn country. Mr Wallace also said the UK will continue the training and support of Ukraine's forces. The Defence Secretary said Russia should by now realise that Western allies are getting stronger by the day.
I think the fact the messaging now is much more about, are the people willing? If there are people willing, we'll help and enable, but if they're not, we'll find another way. That's quite an important message to Russia, that we're not giving up. The international community hasn't fractured, quite the opposite. He calculated they would, we haven't. We're standing stronger every day. And if you look at, for example, Germany's donations and Britain's donations, they've gone up, not down. They've got stronger, not weaker. And if President Putin can't pick up on what that means, then he's going to find himself very quickly in the wrong place at the wrong time.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Mark.
Rory, thank you very much indeed. So the government faced with an urgent question in the Commons on the future of Britain's car industry after one of the world's biggest manufacturing groups warned that the current Brexit deal imperilled the UK's car industry, particularly electric car production. Well, Stellantis, the parent group of Vauxhall, said that current arrangements were a threat to the sustainability of its UK operations. In detail, that's Ellesmere Port, of course, near Liverpool, with the European Automobile Manufacturers Association backing the firm by calling for an extension to the phase-in of tougher post-Brexit trade rules for electric vehicle batteries, saying that the supply chain was simply just not ready. Well, Justin Madders, the Labour MP for Ellesmere Port, home to that Vauxhall plant, granting the question to Business Minister Nusrat Ghani.
So can you tell us what steps the government are actively taking to increase the proportion of vehicle parts actually manufactured in the UK? And we need to make sure that our trading relationship with the EU is updated to reflect the global supply chain difficulties all manufacturing industry is facing. So can the Minister confirm if she plans to make a formal request to reopen negotiations with the EU on the trade and cooperation agreement? It has been made repeatedly clear that without changes to the future trading arrangements and without a proper industrial strategy, the UK car industry is at risk. So what assurances can she give to my constituents that their futures matter to this government? The UK car sector is the jewel in the crown of our manufacturing industry. If we lose it, it won't be coming back. So please, Minister, take action now.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the honourable member will know that when I respond to this question, how, just as he does, how seriously I take the sector too. I know we worked on this previously. And I agree the automotive industry is a vital part of the UK economy, and I will go on to explain all the work that we are doing now. And if we add them all up, it is more or less a very strategic strategy. We know that it's integral to delivering on our agenda for levelling up, which is why it matters to so many constituents, why there are so many MPs in the chamber here today. We know it matters to net zero and advancing global Britain. And I know how important it is to members of Parliament because of the number of people that work in the sector. We are aware of the concerns from the UK and EU car makers about the challenges, and of course we continue to make strong representation.
Nusrat Ghani at the dispatch box, but the Minister not drawn into whether the government would reopen negotiations with the EU on post-Brexit trade arrangements. Well, earlier, we spoke to Lord Frost, the man who negotiated that deal to leave the EU, that the car manufacturers now want reopened.
Well, obviously it would not be sensible to reopen the entire trade agreement. This particular issue was one of the last to be settled in 2020. The car industry was happy with it at the time, but obviously a lot's changed in the energy electric vehicle world since then. Let's see if the government does decide they want to see if this problem can be fixed. Well, it's a good test of whether our new, warmer relationship with the EU can actually deliver anything.
Lord Frost speaking to us a little earlier. Well, let's bring in our political editor, Darren McCaffrey now. And Darren, it was Nusrat Ghani answering that question because Kemi Badenoch, the Secretary of State, we understand, actually speaking to the leaders of this car manufacturing group, perhaps indicating just how important this is or crucial at the moment.
Yeah, indeed, and there was an allusion to that during that urgent question that negotiations were happening at Secretary of State level. Clearly, this is of a significant concern. The government, this is a big industry in the UK, employs hundreds of thousands of people. Someone said it's the jewel in the crown of British manufacturing, the automotive industry, and that's why there is genuine concern. There are kind of two key issues here at play. First of all, it is about this deal that Britain has struck with the European Union, which, by the way, applies both sides. So this is also a problem, it must be said, for the rest of Europe, and it's about the absolute value of a car and how much is manufactured either in the UK or the rest of Europe in terms of value. It is due to go up to 45% next year, and then it's up to 65% in 2027. If the car manufacturer does not meet those targets, then it's going to face a 10% surcharge, a kind of customs tax, if you like, on top of that, which many of those car manufacturers are now saying is simply not sustainable. And the reason that is because a lot of the car batteries and their components effectively now flow through China. China is a massive superpower when it comes to this. They control a massive swathe of the cobalt industry in the Congo and in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and so it's quite difficult for the UK and Europe at the moment. But there's a more particular problem as well, which is the second bit, which is even worse for the UK, is that we're lagging way behind continental Europe when it comes to manufacturing car batteries, and that's where there's real criticism from the Labour opposition saying we've been talking about this for a long time. Car manufacturing talking this for a long time, and the government has been caught napping on not building actual factories to make domestic electric car batteries.
Yeah, and Tesla's first European plant already up and running. on the outskirts of Berlin. And I'm just looking at what the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, said a little earlier, saying the government needed to wake up and grab the wheel, and indicating that ministers had dodged questions about what he was going to do for a long time.
Yeah, indeed, and we know that there's been much talk about these kind of gigafactories, if you like, in different parts of Britain, particularly in the northeast. They have not come to fruition. We know that car manufacturing in the UK has declined quite significantly since 2016. Now, that's not all Brexit related by any stretch of the imagination. The pandemic clearly had a big impact in terms of the number of cars that could be made when people weren't allowed into factories. But let's be frank about this. You're right. Tesla's electric car factory is in Germany. Elon Musk has just spent the last week in northern France with President Macron looking at a second site there, not here. Jaguar Land Rover, of course, one of the prestigious names of British car automotive industry. It is building its electric car vehicle site in Spain. So yes, there is concern that actually if we get slightly further down the track where electric cars are the fundamental basis of the future of the automotive industry, that Britain will not just be left behind, but frankly won't be even on the pitch.
Indeed. Well, Darren, thank you for that. But let's now speak to Professor David Bailey, Professor of Business Economics in Birmingham. What was at one time, of course, the heart of British car manufacturing, no longer the case. But David, I'm just wondering what your assessment of what Stellantis has warned, i.e. that this could be a threat to the sustainability of our UK manufacturing operations. I mean, that does mean Ellesmere Port, which is basically, along with Nissan, all we got left.
Well, I mean, I think it's not a surprise. Car makers have been warning about this potential problem since last year. And basically what's happening is that the rules are getting tightened up in terms of the local content required in battery electric vehicles. And essentially because the battery electric sort of supply chain is not built up quickly enough in the EU, and the increase in raw material prices, it means a lot more value is still coming from Asian countries. And all car makers, I think, in the EU are going to struggle with this. So it's not a surprise, and it's a big deal.
But is there a particular problem for Britain? I mean, I gather over on Europe there are, 35 battery plants or electric car plants either in the pipeline or being commissioned. What we've got at the moment, of course, is Nissan in the northeast. British Volt doesn't seem to be getting its act together, and that's it.
Absolutely right. I mean, I think it's now 40 gigafactories being operational, built or planned. So huge effort going into in the EU in making this happen. The UK has just got one, so we are barely off the starting grid. I mean, there's the problem over the Brexit trade rules. There's also the fact we don't have any sort of industrial policy in the UK. You look at the Biden government, 400 billion in support going into green manufacturing, including making batteries. The EU has responded to that through their Green Deal manufacturing plan. China doing loads as well. We're doing nothing. We actually got more flexibility in the UK post-Brexit to support our industry if we wanted to. And yet what we've chosen to do is just sit on the sidelines watching. The other big problem in the UK is high energy prices. And making batteries is energy intensive. So that puts off investment here.
Is there a question, actually, as to whether you should be going down this road anyway? Because the EU clearly is looking at extending the life of the internal combustion engine, albeit with, more green fuels. Ferrari, at the top of the tree, says, no, we're going to stay with the internal combustion engine. Is it the case that perhaps we would be going down the wrong track if we went fully electric, fully battery?
No, I can see why you're asking, but that's a complete red herring. The industry is going electric, full stop. This whole distraction about e-fuels and synthetic fuels, it might mean a few classics stay on the road, and that's lovely. I mean, I love classic old cars. I'd like to see them carry on. But it's a waste of time, frankly. The cost of that synthetic fuel will be really expensive, and anyway, it's going to get gobbled up by the aviation industry. So automotive is going electric.
OK, so just to touch on this issue about do you support industries, we remember, of course, what the government had to do with British Leyland back in the 70s. It kept swallowing money and all we got at the end of it was an Austin Allegro. Is that why perhaps Jeremy Hunt is a little reluctant to do it? Or can we just not match the figures that the United States is putting into it?
I certainly think there's this ideological issue within government about state intervention, and yet that's not what industrial policy is about these days. It's not top-down picking winners and getting an Austin Allegro. It is about a process of participation between government and business, identifying opportunities and challenges, and then coming up with policies to try and do constructive things. Also, if we want big investment in green technologies, we've got to speed it up because the market won't get us there quick enough. US is doing it, the EU is doing it, China is doing it. We have a fundamental question. Do we want to do this or not, or want to see the action take place elsewhere? Now, I would like to see it happen in the UK because I think automotive is hugely important, 800,000 jobs, important for exports, research and development, levelling up and driving productivity growth. So if the government thinks that's important, it needs to put its money where its mouth is.
OK, well, we understand Kemi Badenoch is meeting those leaders from Stellantis, the parent company, today. Do you assume that is the message that she's getting from them?
I would think so. I think that they've been saying for some time they're going to be struggling with these trade rules. There needs to be an extension of that. There also needs to be a much more supportive industrial policy. It's very interesting. Stellantis's contribution to that Business Select Committee inquiry, they touched on the fact there is not enough support, like in the US, and that energy prices are too high.
Professor David Bailey, thank you very much indeed for taking us through that. And of course, we'll see what emerges from that meeting, crisis or otherwise, and see what the way forward is. Thank you very much indeed. More reaction, of course, to come as we get the details. Now, renters set to get more rights to stand up to unfair landlords, all part of the government's new rental reforms. But with a housing crisis looming too, there are fears that the shake-up could push some landlords to sell up, and that would lead to a shortage of those properties available to rent. So what exactly is the Renters Reform Bill that has been outlined today? Well, there are the details. A ban on so-called no-fault evictions, so landlords cannot evict those tenants who've done nothing wrong or just complained about their property, for instance. Easier for the landlords, though, to repossess properties for any missed rent or antisocial behaviour. The tenants given more rights to keep pets too, and a new watchdog to resolve any disputes. Well, joining us now to give her reaction is property expert Julie Ford, who's joining us. Julie, it's interesting that Labour have basically said they're broadly right in terms of what Michael Gove outlined. So sort of cross-party support for this, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on to talk about this. It really is a breaking story as we go. But yeah, it's really actually quite nice to hear the cross parties really supporting this. And I think it's important for the private rented sector moving forward that everybody is in support of it. It is an extremely regulated industry already, but I think a lot of those laws are so antiquated, they're no longer fit for purpose in today's society. So this rental shake-up, as we're calling it, really is due.
Yeah, 11 million tenants, we're told, 2 million landlords. However, could increased regulation once more reduce the number of properties available for that sector? Will landlords decide it's not worth the candle anymore and just sell up?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever we see any change in regulation, there are always people that don't feel that it's for them anymore. Of course, we are going to see smaller portfolio landlords sell up. They're going to not want to get on board with the new legislation, especially those that self-manage maybe one or two properties, or maybe are coming up to retirement and just think that being a landlord isn't for them anymore. However, what I do feel is those properties won't necessarily leave the rental market completely. They will then be absorbed by larger corporate landlords who will keep them within the private rented sector. So I'm not too concerned that we're suddenly going to see a mass exodus of property, but we certainly will see an exodus of smaller landlords.
But are those bigger corporate landlords also greedier? Is that part of the problem?
I don't think so, because at the end of the day, market rent is market rent and people only pay what they can afford. People can't just put the rent up to a point where people can't afford it, because then it's no longer a business. You can't rent the property out, you've got voids. So I don't think that those corporate landlords are greedier. I think they run their businesses differently, and I think that's the key. They run it as a business, whereas a lot of private landlords don't necessarily see it in that way.
But, of course, we are being told all the time that the level of rents, how expensive it is, particularly in our major cities, is the major problem in the rental sector. No measure here to address that. There's no sort of price control mechanism, for instance.
No, absolutely. And I don't think that rent controls would work. I think it would be too difficult to enforce. But what we have seen with the Renters Reform Bill coming in, and at the moment we're still waiting on the detail, is that there is more notice going to be available to tenants when the landlords do want to increase the rent. And obviously the tenants do have the right to appeal that at the first tier tribunal, and it would then be the first tier tribunal that decide whether that rent is too high, whether to stick it at the rent they're currently having, or whether they'll increase it slightly. So there is redress there for tenants if they're worried about the rent increase that they've been given.
OK, Julie, thank you for taking us through that and giving us your reaction. Thanks for joining us here on GB News Live. And coming up here on GB News Live, a new study finding the sense of well-being that you have depends on where you live. So we'll be going to those who are glum and those are happy. Hopefully, you'll be happy with that too. All back in a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live on what is Mental Health Awareness Week. Many admitting to anxieties on a daily basis. Well, we're being told in a survey that a quarter of Britons say their happiness has declined in the past year. The biggest drop-off, 36% in the capital, London. The lowest, though, still at 17% in the West Midlands. So we've sent our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, to London to be miserable. And our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, much happier fellow, up there in Cannock to find if it's actually the case. Paul, let's go miserable first. You're looking, yes, just the ticket there. But the sun has been shining in the capital. What's wrong with living in London?
Yeah, that's true. I'll tell you what's wrong. It's really expensive, very expensive. I mean, it's always been expensive, but even more so now with inflation and also private rents. Private rents have gone through the roof because there is not just a lack of housing, but there is a lack of homes being rented out. A lot of landlords have vacated the market because the incentives that were originally there from the government, a lot of them have been taken away. They say that things like mortgage relief have gone, things such as regulation have increased, so it's just simply not worth renting out your home. And then, of course, those landlords that are still there, that do have their homes rented out, they've seen interest rates rise, and that's had a knock-on effect for private rents, which now account for more than a third of incomes in the capital. So very difficult earning and living in the capital. It used to be that sort of 30 or 40 grand would see you through. Now it's more like 50 or 60 if you want to at least have some sort of decent standard of living in the capital. This is what Londoners have been telling us.
It's been probably about a year and a half, but I've had other friends who got good deals in COVID and they've had to move out because of the rent increase of like 30-odd%.
Yeah.
And people are looking at moving away out of London.
Are you thinking about that?
My tenancy doesn't end for another 8 months, so you just hope that it's all right.
But it's got to. I mean, you must spend a lot of your income on rent.
Yeah. You do.
Yeah.
But,
and despite the money worries, which obviously is tough for everyone, would you say that you're feeling happy?
well, it's the sun shining. I'm still alive, so happy enough.
And living in Germany, do you have any worries about work, money, career?
Okay. For me, not. I'm working at the Federal Police.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and for me, it's my perfect work-life balance, I think. Yeah. I love my work and everything around Germany.
Yeah,
I have no worries.
There you go, Mark. So one alternative might be to go and work for the police in Germany if you want to feel a little bit happier.
But obviously all to do with what's in your pocket or not left in your pocket, of course. So if we bring in Jack there in Canning, is it because life is cheaper up there in the Midlands?
Well, that's certainly a factor, Mark. I think when you look at the house prices and the average house prices here compared to what Paul was mentioning there, the average house price for a semi-detached house in Cannon is between £100,000 and £200,000. So certainly a lot more affordable for a lot of families here. So they are able to get on that housing ladder and, of course, start that family. And that's what one person said to me today, that he's got a little kid. He was like, you know, this kid is what makes me happy, and he's able to do that because he's lived in Cannon all his life, and he feels nice and happy and at home here. But it's also because as you come out more of those city and those urban areas, you get into the countryside and you got a bit more open space, you've got a bit more sense of and feeling of community. That's certainly what a lot of people have been saying here. But I have been speaking to people today on the street about what about this place makes them so happy, and this is what they told me.
I don't know, I think there's just lots to do. I mean, Birmingham's gone through a massive regeneration time recently, hasn't it? We're local to here. We've got a lovely area called Cannock Chase, so just miles and miles of countryside. I'm really happy. I think ever since I've been on HRT the last 3 years, I'm even more happier.
There's a lot of greasy food. People seem to enjoy that.
Well, I think the greasy food probably one of the reasons I'd probably agree with. Less about the HRT with that lady on my perspective, but of course with bills and things like that, we've had stats from the Financial Conduct Authority today that they say around 1 in 5 adults were finding bills and credit commitments a heavy burden. So that is something, of course, which lays over all of us on a more kind of serious note, and that cost of living issue. But of course, if you can, as that lady said, if you can wake up and with a smile on your face and a bit positive, you can certainly feel a little bit more happy, and that's what it seems to be here in the West Midlands.
I'll finish with a smile as well. Thank you very much to both of you at different locations with different stories to tell, of course. Now, let's take you into Europe, because extraordinary pictures coming in with the organisers cancelling this weekend's Formula One Grand Prix in Italy, the Emilia-Romagna, because of severe flooding in Italy. 8 people dying so far, thousands, including this helicopter rescue from a rooftop in the region in northern Italy. Some areas there reportedly receiving half their average annual rainfall. Yes, annual rainfall in just 36 hours. So the Italian government calling on the organisers of the Grand Prix, the FIA, to cancel that event, to concentrate, as I said, all efforts on coping with the emergency, and you can see why from these pictures. Now, the rainfall apparently is easing, but the river levels are still rising and very high, which has affected many areas, but not just Italy. We're being told that Croatia and also Bosnia, residents saying their homes have been submerged by the water. And of course, as we can see, military units joining other civil defence workers in rescuing the elderly and youngsters as well. And I think maybe, yes, a dog there, happy to be in the dry on the back of that army truck. We'll update you, of course, on that as we get more pictures and more details. Also coming up, police getting a grilling from MPs over those arrests made at the coronation. We'll be updating you on what they've heard. First, an update on all the other news headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. The latest from the GB newsroom. A European trade group is backing calls to reassess post-Brexit trade rules for electric vehicle batteries. It comes after Stellantis, which owns brands like Vauxhall and Citroën, said the current agreement will affect its export and manufacturing operations here in the UK. The European Automobile Manufacturers Association says an extension is needed to phase in the tougher rules. So-called no-fault evictions are set to be scrapped as the government moves to strengthen renters' rights. Well, as it currently stands, landlords can reclaim property without giving tenants a reason. But the new bill gives renters more power to challenge that without losing their home. Renters will also be given the legal right to ask to have pets in their home, which landlords can't refuse without good reason. The Bank of England has warned it will continue to raise the interest rate if the country fails to get a grip on inflation. Governor Andrew Bailey told the British Chamber of Commerce that efforts have been made to tackle soaring costs, but the figure is still much too high. Inflation is still above 10%, but he says the Bank of England's commitment to the 2% target is unwavering. The Defence Secretary warns Russia that the UK will continue supporting Ukraine with whatever it needs. Speaking at a news conference in Germany, Ben Wallace added that Britain will support any nation that doesn't have the means to do so. The news conference comes amid preparations for the upcoming NATO summit in Lithuania. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians
to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Britain is watching.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, you remember many people going to the voting booth for the local elections across Britain, but Northern Ireland is actually going to the polls tomorrow in order to elect its 11 local councils. That election postponed due to the coronation. The results we expect probably from Friday afternoon onwards. Well, our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie has more for us.
Over 800 candidates are competing for just 462 seats. Northern Ireland's councils have been scaled back from 26 to just 11. That process began 21 years ago. Local councils usually have to enforce policy and legislation that is set elsewhere. But more often than not, local councillors are the first point of contact with the public. These elections usually have a smaller turnout and are viewed more on a business basis. But growing concerns around rate hikes and a high street that is under pressure may well awaken the electorate. Many councils depend on the tourist pound and have had a slow return since the last elections due to the pandemic. In some boroughs, industrial action has seen disruption to services in refuge management and collection. Other responsibilities around public parks, open spaces, and most importantly cemeteries, have been so far unaffected. This election is ran under PR and vote management on transfers will be crucial. Dougie Beattie, GB News, Belfast.
And of course, we'll have full coverage of those results for you here on GB News. Friday afternoon onwards, we're expecting those figures to come through. Well, let's return to our top story now, the warning from the owners of Vauxhall that unless the Brexit deal is renegotiated, the entire British car industry could be at risk. Well, this morning, Sir Keir Starmer suggested that he agreed with that assessment and would seek a better Brexit deal with the EU. Does it mean he's going to reopen the whole negotiation? Well, let's get more with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom, clearly Labour were pressing the government on the issue in this urgent question earlier. What is Labour itself saying about its position?
Well, it's fascinating. The Labour Party has been much more bold on this question than many people had expected. When asked by various news agencies this morning, explicitly would the leader of the opposition reopen that Brexit deal, Sir Keir Starmer said that he would. He said that the country was offered what was described as an oven-ready deal, but in reality, in the words of the Labour leader, it's turned out to be half-baked. Now, this has opened the Labour Party up to a huge swathe of criticism, however, because the government says that on this issue of car exports, there are talks going on with the EU right now. It doesn't require the reopening of the entire Brexit agreement, because something the government says can be done because lots of different countries face similar issues with the price of components, particularly batteries, rising in across the course of the pandemic. But of course, the Conservative Party is now saying of the Labour Party, of this idea clear that they want to open up the Brexit deal, not just on the potential for car tariffs if more than 65% of a car is made outside of the United Kingdom, but also opening it up on security cooperation, also opening it up on science, also opening it up in many different areas. The migration provisions for touring musicians, for example. There are lots of areas where the Labour Party has suggested it would want to change things, and this has opened the party up to criticism that just how much closer to the EU would the United Kingdom become under a Labour government.
Yeah, but the crisis issue at the moment, of course, is the car manufacturing sector, 800,000 jobs. Let's remind everyone that Stellantis said the Brexit deal is a threat to our export business and the sustainability of our UK manufacturing operations, i.e. Ellesmere Port. And the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, saying the government really should have seen this issue coming and it's been asleep at the wheel, effectively.
That's the charge. Of course, under the withdrawal agreement, the trade and cooperation agreement that was signed just a couple of years ago, there are 0 tariffs on cars exported from the United Kingdom if they're made in the United Kingdom and by majority value the components come from the UK or the EU. The trouble that this sector is seeing now is that it's not to do with petrol cars or diesel cars, not to do with cars with internal combustion engines. It's to do with electric cars, because such a large proportion of the value of electric cars comes from their enormous batteries. And we don't have any domestic production capacity for those batteries in the United Kingdom as things stand. In fact, only one plant is going ahead of any scale, and that won't come on stream for another few years. So until we have that battery manufacturing capability in the UK, we're importing those batteries from elsewhere, and that has the potential to tip many of these electric cars over the balance agreed in that withdrawal agreement, in that trade and cooperation agreement, I should say, that would mean the majority of the value of the car was not produced in the UK, and therefore it would have non-UK tariffs applied. That's the real fear of the sector. But as I say, the government say that they're in conversations with the EU about this specific issue.
Yeah, and of course, the problem being that tariff makes that car 10% more expensive to export and sell on. Now, we understand Kemi Badenoch is meeting leaders from Stellantis, the car manufacturing group, today. Do we know where she is with the EU and what state those discussions or talks are? Because obviously one of the issues is to try and extend the current arrangements to maybe 2027.
Yes, this is one of the proposals, because by 2027, in the eyes of the government, we will have that domestic battery production capacity in the United Kingdom. One of the strong arguments of the government on this issue is that counterproductively to anyone who wants to see net zero targets reached, counterproductively to anyone who wants to see electric cars encouraged, peculiarly this tariff arrangement would be doing precisely the opposite. It would be encouraging consumers to purchase and producers to produce internal combustion engine cars, which is precisely not what the government of the United Kingdom or the European Union wants to see happen. So the government does think there is a way through here. And indeed, further to your question, official discussions, not just top-level discussions, but discussions between officials in the Business and Trade Department and officials in the European Commission, that is taking place.
Tom, thanks very much for updating us there at Westminster. And, of course, we'll update everyone as we get more from Kemi Badenoch and those discussions. Now, let's update you on the National Conservatism Conference that concludes today after 3 days. It said it had the aim of strengthening principles of national conservatism in Western and other democratic countries. But whatever the lofty aims, for many, it served many to highlight an increasingly divided Conservative Party. Let's get more with our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who's been following the events there. What I think Angela Rayner perhaps rather unkindly described at PMQs today as the Trump Tribute Act Conference.
Yes, the National Conservative Conference seems to have had quite a lot of bad press over the last few days. From where I'm standing in the hall, that there's nothing sort of sinister about it, as has been implied. But as you said there, Mark, I think that what it does show is an increasingly fractured Conservative Party. When Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister at the end of last October, it was felt on sort of all wings of the Conservative Party, both inside Parliament and outside of it, that he had to be given a chance. After the turbulence of the Boris Johnson and Liz Truss era, the Conservative Party just would face total annihilation unless the whole party stood behind Rishi Sunak. So for the last sort of 6 or 7 months, it's felt as though there's a kind of fragile sort of unity in the Conservative Party. All of those different wings, from the One Nationers, the sort of left of the party, to the right of the party, including Suella Braverman and the Stop the Boats Brigade, as it were, have all rallied together around the Prime Minister. Well, that is now falling apart. Ever since the disastrous local election results a couple of weeks ago, Conservatives from all different wings of the party have felt that they now have the sort of moral authority or electoral authority to start chipping away at the Prime Minister. And over the last few days, we've seen Miriam Cates, a real rising star in the Conservative Party, someone who you might expect to be sort of buttering up the government for a big ministerial job. She was openly criticising Jeremy Hunt's childcare budget, really quite harshly criticising it in the opening speech of this conference. We then had Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, if not actually taking aim at Rishi Sunak's policies, at least suggesting perhaps that he's got his priorities wrong. She was saying that legal migration, the very high numbers of legal migration, she implied might be more worrying than the illegal migration, which Rishi Sunak is stopping. So I think that what we are seeing now is a fracturing of that unity, which has held the Conservative Party together by some rather thin threads for the last 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, hence perhaps Angela Rayner today at PMQ saying that Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, should take more note of what's happening at his conferences in his party before trying to make up what is happening in mine. But just to address the issue of Suella Braverman in particular, it's interesting that we're now told that in terms of Cabinet, only one of the 5 measures she wanted in migration have actually sort of got the go-ahead. Is this appearance at this conference going to count against her in terms of a position within government?
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because what we're hearing, and I suspect that these leaks that we're seeing in the paper at the moment might be being briefed by Suella Braverman's team, is that there is a split at cabinet level over what to do about legal migration. Apparently, Suella Braverman is trying to get legal migration down, although, as the Telegraph and the Times have both pointed out in the last couple of days, she has, it seems, been given plenty of opportunities to do so and not seized them. But her aim is to get legal migration down. Meanwhile, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, who is very intent on getting GDP up, obviously, is keen to have a lot of healthy, young, working migrants in the country. So this is a split right at the very top of the Cabinet between the Home Secretary and the Chancellor. And it'll be really interesting to see where Rishi Sunak himself comes down on it in the next couple of weeks.
OK, we shall watch that space. But Olivia, at that conference, thanks for updating us at the end of its 3-day run. Well, elsewhere in the Commons, the Home Affairs Committee was meeting this morning to hear evidence about those arrests made ahead of the coronation. Well, Chief Executive of Republic, Graham Smith, stating that the protest group had given the Met Police all the information they could, but it had made no difference to the traumatic arrests, as he said. Well, then Just Stop Oil disrupted the proceedings in the Commons by claiming they were there to protest for full democracy.
So it sort of links together and then there's a combination on it. So it would have been unusual, which I think is why it would have aroused suspicion of the officers.
You usually use a combination lock to stop.
We're here today to declare democracy.
Come on, officer.
Come on.
Come on, officer. Do your job.
Come on.
Officer.
No, we're not having this.
Come on, officer.
Groans all around, quite effective groans actually, as Just Stop Oil stopped that proceeding, although it did get back in train, and criticism once more of the Met Police and how they policed those protests ahead of the coronation. No protests later, however, as the King and Queen visited Covent Garden, meeting artists and performers from the Royal Opera House. Let's get more with Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, who can join us in the studio. they certainly had a warm welcome today in the centre of London.
Yes, they certainly did. I think it was a surprise for all the tourists and indeed Londoners who were out and about doing their shopping on a lunchtime on a Wednesday in Covent Garden, described as a vibrant hub by Buckingham Palace for tourists and Londoners alike. So no Republic protests, as we have seen recently with King and Queen engagements, which have been announced previously, but they were meeting members of the local community, so they were just doing a walkabout with just people who happened to be there, but they also met local business leaders, market traders and arts organisations. And this is the first time we have seen them out and about together since the coronation.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that.
Yeah, we saw the King last week in Cambridge, but this is the first time we see them out and about together. And the Queen actually spent time solo, actually, as part of this wider Covent Garden engagement for an event kind of tackling domestic violence and supporting victims of domestic violence.
Which seems to be a continuing theme with her. I mean, the Princess of Wales addressing early years learning, but domestic violence is the big issue for the Queen now.
Absolutely. It's a cause close to her heart. She's patron of a number of charities associated with the cause, but she visited the church's Drama for Healing group, which was established in 2019, which supports women who have experienced domestic violence through drama classes. This was at a local church, the Actors Church in Covent Garden, St Paul's Church, marking its 390th anniversary. So a nice, friendly, fun engagement for the King and Queen on the Wednesday afternoon.
And are we likely to see more of this double act, that they are a team? Because certainly, the reflection was that the King is a lot more relaxed with her being there to sort of chivvy her along when, pens go wrong and carriages are late and so on.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I think we'll certainly see a mix, as we have done. We'll see these joint engagements, as you said. The Queen has a tendency to be able to calm down the King in certain situations involving pens or late carriages or whatever. But they both have separate causes that they really care about. It's the King, sustainability, environmentalism, conservation and young people's equipping them with skills they need for later on in life. The Queen, of course, domestic violence, as we've spoken about, osteoporosis as well, a cause close to her heart, and literacy for children and adults. So I'm sure they'll do separate engagements as the months and years go on.
Yeah. Do we know yet what's happening about the Prince's Trust, which, of course, was a huge success story when he was Prince of Wales? I mean, is he going to carry on with that initiative as King, or that move to another member of the royal family?
Well, it's funny you should say that, actually, Mark, because yesterday it was the Prince's Trust Awards, which took place in London, and literally in the last hour or so, the King has hosted a reception at Buckingham Palace for the award winners of the Prince's Trust.
Our answer may lie within that, then.
Exactly, and a number of celebrity ambassadors as well, including Holly Willoughby, actually, who left this morning early, actually, to attend that particular engagement at Buckingham Palace. A very good excuse.
Got to go see the King, sorry. Bye.
Yeah, indeed, it is a very good excuse. So I think the King is certainly going to still have a hand in the Prince's Trust. It is rumoured that one day he wants to hand it over to his grandson, actually, Prince George, but clearly that's not been
to skip a generation, maybe.
Skip a generation, but that's because obviously the Prince of Wales has his own causes, is very busy as heir to the throne. That's not been confirmed, and clearly, that's something that's not going to be confirmed for a number of years. But I would be surprised if King Charles allowed it to become outside the family.
Yeah, and very quickly, a lot of papers concentrating on Royal Lodge and Prince Andrew and eviction notices and all that sort of nonsense. I mean, do we know what is happening behind the scenes?
Well, we know that there is certainly agreements going on with what is going to be happening on the Windsor estate in particular, those Crown Estate properties which the King owns. Prince Andrew is reportedly refusing to budge from Royal Lodge. There are reports that he's been threatened with gas and electricity being turned off. I suspect that is perhaps nonsense, because I don't think the King has that power. However, there's certainly a dispute, I think, with family relations.
Would you know where the gas tap is? Indeed. Cameron, as ever, thank you very much. That's it from GB News Live. Patrick with you for the afternoon. We're back at 12 noon tomorrow. Stay with us on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to your GB News forecast from the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. Another mostly fine day today with sunny spells for many. Rain for some, but much of the rain limited to the far north and northwest of Scotland as some weather fronts move in over the top of an area of high pressure, and it's that high pressure that is leading to a lot of fine weather elsewhere across the UK, with some decent spells of sunshine, but areas of cloud will build. And we will see the odd shower across northern, eastern and central parts of England. They'll be
fleeting. I think for the vast majority it's going to be a fine afternoon. That is until the outbreaks of rain arriving in the far north and northwest of Scotland. Feeling cool here with a breeze from the southwest. Elsewhere, mid to high teens generally, perhaps the odd 20 Celsius in the far south. Any showers in the south tend to disappear into the evening, and then clear spells for many. Thicker cloud for Scotland, Northern Ireland, northern and western parts of England. So a milder night on the whole, but where we do see some clear spells in the south, temperatures dipping into the single figures, and in some sheltered spots, low single figures in the far south. Otherwise, it's 10, 11 Celsius as we start off Thursday. Those areas of cloud across Scotland bringing some outbreaks of drizzly rain, especially for the northwest of Scotland, and that becoming more persistent later in the morning as a weather front moves in. That also affecting western parts of Northern Ireland by the end of the afternoon. But elsewhere across the UK, another fine day to come. Again, the odd shower possible for central and southern parts of England, but plenty of sunny spells breaking out across the southern half of the UK, and temperatures reaching 17 to 21 Celsius. Now, Thursday evening brings further outbreaks of light rain and drizzle for Scotland and Northern Ireland, that trickling into the far north of England by the end of the night. But it weakens as it runs into high pressure, and that high pressure tending to stick around for the weekend, so a lot of fine weather to come. Bye-bye.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever